Good morning, Patrick. You might want to turn your camera off there at the top. Okay, good morning, everybody. This is Sean Forehand. I'll be your facilitator for today for the State Technical Advisory Committee for NRCS Colorado. We're going to give it a couple more minutes. It looks like people are still joining. Just as a reminder, if you look up at the top of your Teams window, you'll see a camera and a microphone. If you'll turn your camera off and mute your mic for the time being, we would appreciate it. So we'll be back shortly. We'll give it a couple more minutes and then we'll get the meeting started. All right, good morning again. It is 8:03 and it looks like the people joining has kind of tapered off a bit, so I think we'll go ahead and start the meeting. First of all, I'd like to remind everybody that if you're not presenting or speaking, please make sure that your camera and your mic or your camera's off and your mic is muted. Although if you have something to say or have a question, please feel free to raise your hand. You can also put a message in the chat. We have a couple of people monitoring the chat so we can make sure that we get questions. Let me go ahead and Mute that person right quick. There we go. And we'll probably have some voting, some recommendations to make using a polling app that we have. And just as a reminder that NRCS employees are it's not permitted for them to vote on these things, to respond to the polls. This is just for the other participants. So I think with that, we are ready to go. Clint, are you online and ready to provide your update? This will be Clint Evans, who is our state conservationist for NRCS Colorado.
Yeah, and thank you, Sean, for facilitating the meeting this morning. So appreciate everybody taking time out of their busy schedules to join us here today on the State Technical Advisory Committee. So really appreciate having all of you on this morning that have taken time to be on here with us. So a couple of quick internal announcements, and then I want to provide a few updates and just express some appreciation to several of our partners around the state. And first and foremost, I want to announce that Randy Randall, our Assistant State Conservationist for Partnerships, that many of you have worked with over a number of years. Randy served as the Assistant State Con for Operations for 12 plus years prior to moving into the partnerships role in 2015. And then has stepped in as the acting state conservationist on a number of occasions when I've been pulled away on detail opportunities in other states and with headquarters. And so Randy has announced that he is planning to retire on September 29th. So here at the end of the month, he'll be stepping away after 34 plus years of federal service with the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service. And then Randy also is a retired Army Reserve military veteran as well, with, I believe, 25 years of military service to his credit as well. So Randy's off this week. He's not going to be on with us here today, I don't believe. Let me double check. And anyway, so for those of you that have worked with Randy, if you want to take the time to drop him a note over the next couple of weeks, he'll be phasing out here by the end of the month. So wanted folks to be aware of that. And then I also want to introduce Allison Keaton. And Allison, I might ask you to flip your camera on and give a brief intro for yourself. Allison started with NRCS Colorado back in May of 2023. She is now our Assistant State Conservationist for Management Strategy. For those of you that may have worked with Donna Rasmussen retired a year ago into September, and it took a few months, but we're really glad and excited to have Allison on board with us here in Colorado. So Allison, I'll give you the floor.
Good morning, everyone. Just a quick update about myself. I started with NRCS in 2003 in Indiana and worked there till 2015 and took a short break from the agency and returned to the state of Montana in 2020 as their business services specialist, and then came to Colorado here in the summer. I'm looking forward to meeting with everyone and working with all our partners and as much as I can as part of the management strategy staff. So thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Allison. And Allison will be overseeing our cooperative partnership agreements, working with Barb Golke as once Randy steps down. So for those of you that would have historically engaged with like Randy and Barb in the interim, we'll have you engaging with Allison as the Assistant for Management Strategy also. And then we'll have some upcoming staffing changes in the partnerships role. So once that comes out, we'll make those announcements as well. I just want to give a huge shout out, and I know our NRCS field staff and our conservation partner staff that work at the field office level. We don't have any of those folks on here today, but some of them may take the time to listen to the recordings. And I just want to say how much I personally appreciate all the hard work and effort that our field staff and our conservation partner staff have put into fiscal year 23's rollout of our conservation programs and technical assistance all across the state. Not only did they implement our general farm bill appropriations, they also stepped up and implemented our Inflation Reduction Act supplemental allocations that we received for both the Environmental Quality Incentive Program as well as the Conservation Stewardship Program in fiscal year 23. So I know that was a heavy lift, at least in this initial year with that rollout. And I'll be sharing a little bit more here in a moment about what we anticipate for fiscal year 24. So really appreciate all of our staff and partners out there helping support us. And then our conservation partners that also support us with matching agreements. Les, I'm going to mute you here. Anyway, we have a number of conservation partners all across the state: Bird Conservancy of the Rockies, Colorado Department of Agriculture and Colorado State Conservation Board, the Colorado Association of Conservation Districts, Pheasants Forever, Quail Forever, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, Colorado State Forest Service, BLM, U.S. Forest Service, and a host of others, our sister agencies, the Farm Service Agency and Rural Development that we work closely with. It takes that whole community of conservation partners to get these programs delivered, to get the outreach to our customers. We also have a number of land trust entities all around the state. Two of our biggest partners is Colorado Open Lands and Colorado Cattlemen's Agricultural Land Trust. Have been some of our primary easement partners, as well as the Rio Grande Land Trust and many others. The Nature Conservancy, Trout Unlimited, National Forest Foundation, all of those folks are partnering and serving as lead sponsors on regional conservation partnership projects here in the state. Also want to give a huge shout out to Commissioner Greenberg and the Colorado Department of Agriculture, Les Owens, Cindy Lair, Nikki Brinson, and the team. Not only did they take on additional funding to help us with our staffing through our district conservation technician agreement and working with local soil and water conservation districts all across the state. They're also working with us to develop an Inflation Reduction Act district technician agreement that'll allow us to further expand capacity around the state. And then in addition to all that, they're administering their state soil health program along with a conservation innovation grant. And then most recently, we're awarded a climate smart commodities grant through USDA and through NRCS, totaling $25 million that's going to support the implementation of the Saving Tomorrow's Agricultural Resources, or STAR program, is going to allow that to expand across 5 or 6 states here in the West, in addition to the work that they're doing here in Colorado. So huge shout out to Commissioner Greenberg, Les, Cindy, Nikki, and the team at Colorado Department of Ag and the Colorado State Conservation Board for their contributions there. And then also want to thank Jim Cecil, president of Colorado Association of Conservation Districts and the CACD board, along with Abby Gray, the new executive director. And y'all are going to have an opportunity to hear from Abby and Jim for an update here later in the meeting. But just really appreciate their continued partnership with education outreach programs all around the state through Envirothon, Camp Rocky, work with us on workshops and helping support conservation districts all across the state to develop demonstration projects and to do producer workshops and bring in outside expertise and experts across the ag industry and conservation throughout the state. So really appreciate Jim, Abby, and the CACD board and their ongoing support to our partnership as well. Want to shift gears a little bit and talk about some upcoming priorities and some things that just on the radar. So all federal agencies have been advised to update their shutdown procedures and plans. We're being told there's a high probability we will have a federal shutdown come October 1st. Fingers crossed, staying hopeful that Congress will pass a continuing resolution and we can avoid a shutdown here at the end of the fiscal year. If you had asked me about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I would have said there's probably a 90 to 95% chance we'd have a shutdown. Right now today, I'd say it's somewhere around a 50 to 60% chance that we'll have a federal shutdown at the end of September. So just for awareness, if and when that occurs, we'll have to go through our shutdown procedures, close up our offices, secure our equipment, and wait until Congress passes either a continuing resolution or passes an omnibus bill to fund fiscal year 24. So if and when that happens, our offices will be closed once again, and all of our partner staff that work under our agreements will also essentially be on a furlough along with their federal counterparts here through NRCS, FSA, Rural Development, and others. Also, speaking of Rural Development FSA, you're going to have an opportunity to hear, I believe, from Kent Pepler, our State Executive Director with Farm Service Agency. Really appreciate Kent and his team, Brandon Terraza, Cindy Buchason, Woody Woods, and all the folks at FSA are wonderful sister agency partners and help us implement conservation programs. They handle all the eligibility paperwork and documentation for NRCS program applicants, and we work collaboratively to implement the Conservation Reserve Program. Also want to recognize Hunter Cleveland. She's the new CRP program specialist for FSA here in Colorado. Many of you may have had opportunities to engage with Hunter previously, but we'll have an opportunity to engage with her and the FSA team as well today. As far as the Farm Bill status, as most of you are aware, the 2018 Farm Bill is scheduled to expire at the end of September. So we are waiting for Congress to take some action. Most likely what we're anticipating is we'll see a one-year extension on the 2018 Farm Bill rules and authorizations going into fiscal year 24. And then most likely we'll see a new Farm Bill either in late fiscal year 23 or sometime in fiscal year 24 or calendar year 24, see a new Farm Bill pass. So right now, hopefully we get two things in the short term. At a minimum, we get a continuing resolution so that we can stay operational rolling into fiscal year 24. And then also we need that extension on the 2018 Farm Bill so that we have the funding and program authorizations to move forward in delivering conservation around the state. So just for awareness, be aware that those are two major pieces of legislation that need to be passed by the end of September. And then lastly, I just want to mention staffing and hiring prior to mentioning a couple other things about some upcoming and potential program partnership opportunities that we'll talk a little bit about during the meeting today. But staffing within NRCS, a lot of folks keep asking what our staffing level is. And right now we have 210 employees on board out of our typical staffing cap of 234 in the state. So we're about 90%, 85, 90% staffed around the state. Although with the Inflation Reduction Act, if we were to get a full extension on the 2018 Farm Bill and receive a full appropriation for those conservation programs, plus get a full funding appropriation for the Inflation Reduction Act, we could see our conservation program financial assistance funds and easements program funds double in fiscal year 24. And so what does that mean for those of you that maybe haven't been as engaged with our programs or what our budgets look like here in Colorado? On an average year, on an annual basis, we will implement somewhere in the neighborhood of $75 to $80 million in financial assistance and easement program assistance in the state of Colorado, plus around $25 to $30 million in technical assistance funds in a typical year. So if we were to get a typical Farm Bill allocation for our conservation programs, plus the technical assistance, and get a full appropriation for the Inflation Reduction Act that also provided up to $20 billion for conservation programs administered by NRCS plus conservation technical assistance, we could see those numbers grow upwards of $150 to $160 million total in financial assistance and conservation easement program funding, plus our technical assistance funds double proportionately. So we could go from 25 to 30 million upwards of 50 to 60 million in technical assistance in fiscal year 24. Now, those two things are heavily dependent upon what happens in the fiscal year 24 budget negotiations with Congress, whether or not we get a full appropriation in fiscal year 24, and then whether or not the Inflation Reduction Act is impacted in any way by the Farm Bill negotiations. There is some talk on the Hill about essentially rescinding portions of the IRA and rolling it into the 2023 or 2024 Farm Bill negotiations. So we could see some reductions in that funding and see some of it get rolled into the broader umbrella of the next Farm Bill, versus getting a full appropriation. So fingers crossed, we'll wait and see what happens. But either way, it's a once in a career, probably a once in a lifetime opportunity if we were to get a full Farm Bill funding authorization plus a full Inflation Reduction Act funding authorization. That could be some pretty unprecedented financial assistance and conservation easement program funding for us to work with, not just in Colorado, but all around the nation, but especially here in Colorado. It could have some major impacts on our ability to reach agricultural producers and forestry producers around the state, and our ability to expand our partnerships with additional conservation partners, depending on what those funding levels are. And then a couple of things I want to mention as upcoming priorities, and I want to thank Ray Aberle for serving as our chair of our wildlife subcommittee for NRCS State Technical Committee. Ray's going to talk a little bit about what's coming up with lesser prairie chicken and some work that Colorado Parks and Wildlife is doing on big game migration corridors. We may have an opportunity for NRCS Colorado to participate in an initiative that Undersecretary Bonney started in fiscal year 22 in the state of Wyoming to help support removing obstructions within big game migration corridors in Wyoming in 2022. That was expanded in 2023 to include parts of Montana as well as Idaho. And we would like to see that expand into Colorado in fiscal year 24. So we may have some more information coming. Ray's going to be able to share a little bit on the status of what CPW has been working on for big game migration corridors. And then also, we've been engaging as a partnership, both Ray and I and some of my staff have been engaging with the Lesser Prairie Chicken Landowners Alliance in order to further our conservation efforts to support lesser prairie chicken habitat and preserve rangelands and grasslands within lesser prairie chicken habitat areas. And then also want to mention that we'll certainly be welcoming your input as Lizwith and the programs team here in Colorado. They're going to go over some overview of FY23 accomplishments, as well as be requesting your input for some of the rollout here in fiscal year 24. So Sean, with that, I'll wrap it up for now, and then look forward to engaging with the committee here later in the meeting. And then just to be sure, Sean, I'll pop you a message on the side. I noticed in the draft agenda that we had accidentally left CACD off for an update and report. So we want to make sure we have not only Colorado Department of Ag and State Conservation Board give their updates, but also Colorado Association of Conservation District. So Sean, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Clint. I think I got the latest agenda that was sent out to everybody at the top of the page, second page at 10:55. I think we have Abby for CACD. Does everybody else see that same thing?
It's on the copy I have too.
Okay. So we do have them on
Thank you.
CACD at 10:55. All right. Well, thank you, Clint. Next up is Elizabeth With, our Assistant State Conservationist for Programs here with Colorado NRCS. So Liz, if you're ready, please take it away.
There's my microphone mute. Afternoon. Oh my, it's a start. Good morning, everybody. Happy Tuesday. So we're going to be talking to you about a bunch of financial assistance program opportunities and trying to get some of your feedback. We are going to be sharing some fiscal year 23 numbers with you, but please know that we're still working on a lot of obligations and getting things wrapped up. So everything that we're showing today is hopefully in preparation for fiscal year 2024 with a little bit of where we currently stand in fiscal year 23, albeit it is not the final numbers. So a couple of other things that I just wanted to hitch up about and make sure that you were aware of is we had some really cool opportunities this year with a couple of different authorities. So a lot of folks heard a lot about Act Now. Act Now is a cool program authority that we have to theoretically help participants work through obligations a little bit faster than we typically have. We piloted it for CSP this year, and we also had some fund pools based off of our cover crop initiative that we did the previous year running through Act Now. It is not a different program. It is nothing special other than it helps us to streamline funding those applications and maybe get them through the system a little bit faster. It uses the basic CSP and EQIP policy to actually get those through. So if you heard that, it is not a new program. There's nothing different. And later, I don't know that we're ready to discuss it quite now, but if I were you, I'd anticipate seeing a lot more Act Now fund pools that NRCS will offer in the future. We also had some really cool opportunities with the Inflation Reduction Act, and that's the legislation that allows us to directly improve soil carbon, reduce nitrogen losses, reduce, capture, and avoid or sequester CO2, methane, or nitrous oxide emissions through agricultural production. So some of you heard about our IRA fund pools and some of the stipulations that were placed on those. In just a minute here, I'm going to place our climate smart ag practices in the list for fiscal year 23. We do anticipate that this list is going to be heavily revised potentially for fiscal year 24, still aiming to hit those targets, but maybe with a couple other practices added, we hope. So we'll have some details regarding IRA projects that were implemented this year. We'd appreciate any feedback that you're willing to give us and help us to understand how we could better implement those funds across the state. One of our other goals for fiscal year 2024 is to expand our conservation stewardship program implementation across the state. We currently have it in a couple of field offices are really good at helping us implement conservation stewardship, but we'd like to expand that opportunity across the state and wanted to use this time as we go through some of our CSP information to kind of outreach and find out if there's things you don't know about it, or if you are aware if there's reasons for us not using it widely, what can we do to improve that and really expand CSP throughout the state in 24. So we've got a really talented programs team. It's a little bit awkward because we're sitting all together for first time in a long time. We're all sitting together in a conference room together, preparing for fiscal year 24. It's fabulous, but a little awkward over Teams as we're each staring at our own computer monitors. Each programs member is going to go ahead and present the information that they have on my machine, and so we'll kind of be shifting around a little bit. Please bear with us, but they're an incredibly talented group of people who will share that information with you instead of listening to me. So we do have quite a bit of things to talk to you about. As I stated, we are trying to get fiscal year 24 programs kind of prepared and ready to go. So just as soon as we get those allocations and the fiscal year rolls over, we can start and get things moving. So with that, I think it's most important to kind of talk about our partners and some feedback that they've been giving us. So through the local working groups, Amber Freehoff has been able to put together the information. Give me a minute here, and I'm going to share our presentation. Amber, I'm going to scooch over and let you. There's the slides. It should be popping up any second now.
All right. Good morning, everyone. As Liz said, I'm Amber Freehoff. I am the CSP manager for the state, but I've also taken on the role of helping conservation districts with their local work group meetings and analyzing those results so that we can help shape the next fiscal year. So every year, conservation districts are asked to host a local work group meeting. And I know We've heard some comments about, well, why do we need to do this every year? And it does truly help us to determine what those state priority resource concerns will be, as well as identifying our state priority resource concerns, which we will be talking about later within the presentation. And that's one of the polling questions that we do have available for you today to get that feedback as well. It also helps us identify what barriers we have in our conservation programs and how we can address those barriers and make it smoother for our partners and participants to participate within our different Farm Bill programs. It also helps us to pinpoint our outreach needs, and that was a big thing that was presented from several different local work groups, that partners and producers are looking for more of that outreach from NRCS staff. And then lastly, it helps us to recognize those training needs, not only for our staff, but our producers and partners as well, and help us gear which way our training needs need to go for the next following year. We did ask all 75 conservation districts to host a local work group meeting. If the districts did not host one, we asked the local resource team lead to host that meeting. We did see quite a bit of increase from the 22 level to the 23, with over 700 individuals participating statewide. And this is just partners and participants, so other producers that attended and voiced their levels of concern on how we should shape fiscal year 24. So it was great to see an increase from the previous year. One of the main questions we ask is to list your priority resource concern within your conservation district. And then I take all of those results and combine them into statewide. And so these are the main conservation resource concerns across cropland, whether it be irrigated or dry land, rangeland, and then pasture land, which in NRCS terms is, more of your introduced species, or it could be irrigated or fertilized grasses. So here's what those looked like. And then we break off forestry into its own little category. And here are the top results for forestry as well. I do want to note that there was no significant change from the 2022 to 2023. So as a result, our consideration for you all today is to keep the priority resource concerns for ag land listed there, as well as the non-industrial private forest land. I'll give you a second just to look at that. We also ask producers what works well within your conservation district. And our goal for this is so that we can identify what practices we should be looking at either to do for the priority resource practices that we'll be talking about later today. And so here's just a list. I like to note that there are both management, vegetative, and structural practices listed here across all of our different land uses. We also ask our partners and producers to identify those conservation practices that don't work well. And the reason for that is that we can identify any training needs that we might need to address in helping the producer get these type of practices out. This year we did ask them if they did note something that does not work to list the reason why. And drought conditions, luckily, which we didn't have much of this last year, but previous drought conditions was the main reason why these few practices listed were in the do not work category. We also want to know what barriers exist and how we can help to address those barriers. And so as Clint has mentioned, he's looking to staff up the state and so that we can help address the local offices that lack of, how many staff is there to help the producers. We also saw that producers are saying that they have a lack of understanding or knowledge of the programs. And then there's some things, that we just can't address, whether it be the cost of materials or local supply, but we will be discussing ways that maybe we can help curb those within the local level. We also ask what new technologies producers are seeing and want to use in order to create new cost scenarios with our national office. And so these are the list of the most popular different technologies that producers have suggested NRCS look at creating cost share for. And then lastly, we just asked them if they had any additional comments. And so these are the ones that rose to the top. We've been asked to share and be more social in the social media and email aspects, to have more outreach and success stories across the board so that producers know what works well from one area to another. Urban ag is also becoming very key, and producers are asking for more funding for smaller farms within that 10 acres or less. They're also asking for quicker turnarounds within our program. So from the time that they fill out an application to the time that they are approved for a contract, as well as from the approval of the contract to then being able to implement. So we have, that is one of the places that we're going to be looking at the Act now to look and address that quicker turnaround. And then lastly, our participants and partners are looking for more clarification on the requirements for the program processes. With that, that's all I have. If anybody has any questions. All right, thank you, everyone. I'm going to turn it over to Stacy, and she is going to talk about EQIP.
Good morning. I'm Stacy Eskew, one of the 2 EQIP program managers here in the state. Kendra Bradner is our other program manager, and she's here to my left and will be commenting and chiming in when I've missed something. So for EQIP, it's one of our largest farm bill programs here in the state. I think just about everybody's probably really familiar with EQIP. It's probably the most widely used program. So this slide here in front of you is just the kind of the last 5-year history of the obligation in the state of Colorado. From 22 back, or from 19 back, we used a different tool to record that data. So we like to keep it relevant to the recent past. In 21, you'll see a huge increase there. One note is that we had a few new opportunities arise. Conservation incentive contracts were one within EQIP that came about in 21, as well as water management entity funding opportunities. Those were geared towards ditch companies or water delivery companies to help cover the costs of updating those diversions and head gates and the larger structures on those canal companies. So those did increase our obligation quite a bit. I'm going to share my screen. We're going to scoot so Kendra can see too. So in 23, these were the funding opportunities or the fund pools that we offered within the EQIP program. We have a large variety of fund pools that cover everything from irrigation all the way down to forestry and wildlife. We do organic type fund pools. The Organic Transition Initiative, that was a new one this year that was a 1-year opportunity. It allowed for transition to organic, and require the use or the planning of a transition type practice in those contracts. This here is our EQIP summary of 23. These numbers will change slightly because we are still trying to obligate a few contracts. The IRA funds, Liz spoke briefly on that earlier. We're tasked with keeping those funds separate, so they couldn't be added into our general allocation. Of that funding, policy requires that we send certain percentages to beginning farmer ranchers, limited farmer ranchers. A certain percentage has to be used to fund wildlife contracts. And so with our general and IRA funding both together, 7% of our overall funding went to limited resource, 37% went to beginning farmer rancher, 12% went to our socially disadvantaged, 1% went to our veterans, and 63% of all the funding went to livestock related projects, with 19% going to wildlife projects. In 24, we have offered or recommended these practices as our high priority practices to you guys. Policy dictates that we cannot select more than 10 high priority practices. They are practices that have a high potential for conservation benefit, but are usually underutilized within our areas. These also can receive a higher payment rate, but in order to receive that higher payment rate, they have to be addressing certain resource concerns. And it's just one of a list that includes source water depletion, degraded plant condition, field sediment, nutrient and pathogen loss, soil quality limitations, and concentrated erosion. These are the same from last year, and the way we go about trying to decide which ones should be high priority is we go through and see what practices are underutilized and have a high degree of treating conservation, and then see how often it's been used in the past few years. We try really hard to make sure we aren't picking ones that are continuously used and trying to get some new practices out there. So I spoke briefly on the conservation incentive contracts earlier, just about its introduction in 21. The policy requires that we pick high priority projects through that part of our EQIP funding. Last year we had it just as a grazing land resilience to drought fund pool, and only could treat projects that were grazed range, grazed pasture, or grazed forestry land, and we recommend the same thing this year. We also have to have resource concerns within that that high priority area. So here are the three we recommend. They are the same ones from last year. And that is all we have for EQIP. Do you have anything to add?
I don't think so. Again, just listing for the EQIP CIC. So CIC was the conservation incentive contracts, which is kind of the stepping stone, just in summary, between EQIP and CSP. Someone can enroll in CIC up to 200,000, and that 200,000 does not count towards the basic EQIP payment limitation of 450,000. So it's another additional opportunity then for landowners to get more conservation on the ground and use that as a stepping stone to CSP. So Stacy mentioned the FY 24 high priority practices. They are the same as last year, as she stated. And then also every state needs to designate a high priority area for this CIC. That high priority area must encompass the entire state. So if we go ahead and recommend this for grazing land, it would encompass the whole entire state. So anyone within Colorado for grazing land can be eligible to apply for CIC. So
one other thing is in those CIC contracts, they have to agree to do one of the approved management practices that National has sent out a list. It works. It like Kendra said, it's a stepping stone between EQIP and CSP, so it has aspects of both. In CSP, they receive annual payments, and in CIC, it's similar, but the annual payment comes from one of those approved management practices, and then they can go ahead and facilitate the installation of regular structural and vegetative practices like EQIP. So it is just a hybrid of the two.
Yep.
So with that, if there are questions, we'll entertain them now. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and move over to CSP.
Okay, don't forget that if you have questions, you can raise your hand or put a note in the chat, however is best for you, and we'll try to respond.
Okay, so not seeing any EQIP, I'll go ahead and transition into the CSP update. So here is a look at, oh, our slides are messed up. This is the EQIP one. I have a graph, so I will go ahead and get that stuck in the chat correctly. So our apologies for not having the correct graph there. For our funding opportunities, these were the fund pools in 2023. We do receive an allocation that is tied to organic, and then the sage grouse initiative taking place for the greater and Gunnison sage grouse. Those are specifically earmarked, and we did not receive any applications in both of those fund pools for fiscal year 23. So that is a place that we are looking to increase our outreach and help target for fiscal year 24. Like EQIP, we do have to set aside 5% to beginning farmer and rancher, as well as socially disadvantaged. And then out of the rest of the allocation from the general funds, I took 10% for non-industrial private forest land. And then the rest, there was also 10% to urban ag. And we did see some pretty good interest there. And that is another place that we definitely want to do some outreach to. And do some more training to our local staff as well to prep those conversations with our smaller producers as they do receive a minimum payment that could help benefit their operation. And then the rest of the funds from our general allocation were split into equal amounts between areas 1, 2, and 3 within Colorado. And then for signups 2 and 3, we went ahead and tried the Act Now policy that's in place for the CSP, and had some really good success within our sign up 3. So this is a look at the contracts. We do have a renewal funding, so that is an addition. Participants can choose to renew their application for an additional 5 years, picking up an additional activity to do. And then we have our general sign up here, and then lastly the IRA. And to note, we are still funding within the IRA fund pool. So this is where we were as of yesterday, and we are expecting to see quite a bit of an increase within that fund pool before the end of the fiscal year. And then lastly, for CSP, this is the same slide that you saw in the local work group. In CSP, there is another. Not only do they have to do the eligibility with the FSA, but they also have what we call a stewardship threshold. And that's looking at the amount of resource concerns met at the time of application as well as the end. And For renewals, this plays a very big part in determining if an application is applicable. So they do have to meet 2 of these state priority resource concerns at the end, and where these align with local work group for participants saying this is what their resource concerns would be statewide. This is why we have this recommendation in front of you. And with that, we'll entertain any questions for CSP. And like I said, we'll go ahead and get the updated graph in there in the chat so you guys can see how CSP has been trending with the amount of applications as well as funding levels. Thank you.
Excellent. So this comes down to the interactive portion of our conversation this morning. So we just threw a lot of information at you, but we wanted you guys to have a good background on where we actually were for 2024. So now we're going to go back through. Thank you. And we're going to ask for some discussion and some polling questions. So first and foremost, we're going to head back to, and I think it's going to be easiest to pull up. Okay, our priority resource concerns and considerations for fiscal year 2024. So these are what were recommended by the STAC. These are what we had for 2023. We'd like to open it up for discussion. These priority resource concerns enable NRCS to focus funding to target key concerns that we see in Colorado. I would like to open it up for discussion. I know that we've discussed this a couple times in the past. We've got NRCS lingo is up there, but if there's concerns, what are you guys seeing as concerns across the state that maybe don't necessarily fit in these categories? I'm really good at awkward silences, but Justin is going to save me. Mr. Miller, please feel free to speak up.
Yes, ma'am. I just had a quick question. Are these listed in ranking from top to bottom, or are they just listed from top to bottom?
It's just an all-inclusive list. So typically in the past, we have, if they're priority resource concerns established with a higher weight than all other resource concerns, it's not necessarily top to bottom. Great
Okay,
question,
thank you.
Justin. Yep. Hey.
I'll just toss out there. The reason I ask is the wind and water erosion was on the bottom, and being from Southeast Colorado, it's amazing the difference a year makes. And this year we're in pretty good shape, but the last 2 years previous to this country's tried to blow away. So I just really don't want to lose that as a focus area.
Totally, absolutely, 100% agreed. That one is alphabetical. So there's some others that are out of order, but that's the only reason it's at the bottom. It is a high priority for sure. So folks, feel free to use your wildest whim. I mean, Clint brought up wildlife corridors earlier. There's a plethora of things. You don't have to worry about putting it into our lingo. We can help figure out what it is. But otherwise, what we are going to do is ask for a recommendation this morning. So Sean has set up a poll now everywhere poll.
Yeah, that was close, Liz. It is. So I'm gonna put a link in the chat. This is Poll Everywhere. This is one of the licenses that we've purchased to allow us to gather feedback from the outside. Our internal tools don't reach to the outside. So if you are willing to provide a recommendation, if you'll click on that link, the first thing that'll happen is you'll be asked to log in. If you would put your name and the organization that you represent, if any, please do. Again, a reminder that NRCS employees are not eligible to respond, but in just a second, I'm going to go ahead and launch the first poll. And when you have that up on in your browser, you will see the question appear. And we're going to go ahead and do that right now. So it should be displaying. And all you need to do is click yes or no. And there are the resource concern considerations for FY24 on the screen for you to look at. And then we'll give it just a few seconds. And when we get the results in, I'll go ahead and post those in the chat so that everybody can see what the results were.
Ron, I'm gonna let you run the poll, so you tell me when we're ready to move on.
Okay. I am looking at I'm not seeing anybody else. Anybody else needing more time to take a look at that? And
So as you guys are considering real quick, Amber was able to drop into the chat all of the NRCS lingo resource concerns. So just as you're kind of considering and answering that question, if there's ones that we've missed, you've got the full list. Thank you, Amber.
okay.
And you're
go ahead.
perfect.
Go ahead, Liz.
Nope.
You ready?
I was just going to say, if you need to change your answer, you can always change your answer until Sean says we can't anymore.
You can. I think we're about at that point. So I will go ahead and post the results. And there they are. And we'll lock that question and get ready for the next one.
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you, sir. Okay, let's see. We're going to head to our high priority practices next and just discuss the list as Stacy and Kendra presented those. Okay, so this right now is the proposed list. It's the same list that we had for fiscal year 2023. These are the practices that we can offer in additional payment, a higher payment rate to facilitate adoption. Typically, they're practices that we've seen fairly low adopted in the past that give us a lot of bang for our buck when we're talking about treating resource concerns, and especially those priority resource concerns that we just established that recommendation for. So again, this is supposed to be the interactive feedback portion. We're really hoping for feedback for our partners on what practices we should be implementing and what practices we should be incentivize participants to implement. So
Are we ready for the next question?
I guess I'd really like discussion.
There we go.
Kyle's gonna
Yes.
save me.
Yeah, I'll try. Just a couple of, questions, suggestions, throwing it out, but like wetland restoration is one. I work with Trout Unlimited, and that's a priority practice that I think that we could see being maybe included on this list, 657. So I'll just throw a plug in for there.
Okay. That's any additional discussion? So this list is held to 10 practices. So if we decide to recommend 657, if the STAC decides to recommend 657 in addition, we need to discuss which one needs to be removed.
It was on there.
So Stacy, we're all stuck sharing one microphone. Stacy, come over here and say that.
Okay. Just to note, that was on our priority practice list in 22 or 21. I don't remember which year. And when we went to look through them to pull up our 23 recommendations, it wasn't being planned at all. And I don't know if that was that producers didn't know it was an option, or if it just wasn't, they didn't know what to use it for, or there was just no interest in it. So that is a note.
I do believe we had it on there for a couple of years and had a couple of seasons to gauge interest.
Now, that doesn't mean it can't be planned. It just won't receive a higher payment rate.
Okay.
All of our practices can still be planned.
Okay. Thanks for letting me know. I started up with TU last year, so wasn't part of this conversation in the past. But thank you.
Okay. No, it's all right.
Yeah, welcome to the STAC. It's great to have you, sir.
Deb Daniel,
Okay.
I see you have your hand raised.
Yes, I do. Thank you so much. So Liz, could you explain 449 irrigation water management for me, please?
Oh gosh, that might be better suited for an engineer or for Miss Kendra.
I think Jean's on the line.
Jean? Brady?
Brady
Brady's
McElroy is on the
online.
line.
Brady.
Yeah.
Okay, 449 irrigation water management is a practice intended to allow irrigators to have access to better information about their soil moisture, crop demands, water quality, things like that, that allow them to make more informed irrigation decisions within the constraints that they have placed on them by their water delivery infrastructure. It will look different for a rotational canal than it will for a groundwater well in the Ogallala, for example. But its main intent is to allow a client to make informed irrigation decision based on science and data.
Great. That's great. Thank you.
Are we still okay with that, Deb?
Yes, that I wasn't sure what the irrigation water management was. Of course, I'm always concerned about that water level, water quantity is always a concern for our area. And so I just so much appreciate all that NRCS has done with the EQIP program towards retirement of irrigated acres and irrigation wells. So I just was wanting to make certain that I understood exactly what 449 was about. Thank you.
Man, great question.
Okay, forgive me if I butcher your last name. Shannon Wattis, please correct me. Just when I thought I had everybody's last name down.
No, you did. You said it right. It's Shannon Wattis. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you.
I'm with Rivers Edge West, so we work on riparian restoration. I just wanted to ask if invasive plant species management was included in any of these topics, along with our riparian habitat improvements, wildlife improvements.
Yep. So for resource concern categories, pest pressure is on the list as a priority resource concern. And then one of the practices that we've used to potentially address some of the herbaceous weeds that we'd see out there is 315, and it is on the list. In some of those woody species like tamarisk, Russian olive, we would use a brush management practice, which is not on the list. But I will throw out there that we have seen brush management is a fairly common practice that's pretty widely adopted, which is one of the reasons it hasn't been added to the list prior to. But it's up for discussion.
That's helpful. I think if it's widely used, I mean, to what you said earlier, it doesn't mean that you can't still try to get the practice accomplished. It just isn't going to get a higher priority. So I'm okay with that, but I just wanted to make sure that, yeah, it was being included. It was actually being used.
Yes, ma'am.
Great, thank you.
Yep. Okay, I do see that we have a couple of comments in the chat again regarding 657 wetland restoration. Rob and Carrie, does that mean, are we still voting to add that to the list? And if so, which ones would you recommend that we potentially remove?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, Rob Fenwick with Burke Conservancy of the Rockies. That is a bit of a challenge with being a fairly short list. So I guess that would be my next question is, are there, just to the group, are there practices that we feel like either might be redundant here or that otherwise are poorly utilized? My interest in adding the wetland restoration piece is that's a lot of what we do, especially down in the San Luis Valley in partnership with NRCS, and would like to do more. We feel like a lot of times wetland restoration doesn't rank out very high So this could be a way potentially, if we can make it a priority practice, we might be able to get higher ranking for a lot of the different projects that we're looking at and get more of those actually done on the ground.
Okay, perfect. And so when you're talking about wetland restoration, we do have a couple of components on there, that stream bank and shoreline protection and the stream habitat improvement and management. Are those wetlands typically on stream with bank and river type projects, or are you talking about actual like off stream, off channel wetland improvement?
It's some of both. Carrie, if you wouldn't mind chiming in, you may have a better idea of some of the specifics there, especially in the valley.
Sure. Hi. Yeah, I guess my concern is, and we just talked about this, or some of this, in the wildlife subcommittee meeting yesterday. We have a lot of wetland restoration watershed projects going on in the valley, and we're having a really hard time partnering with NRCS. And a lot of that has to do with access to programs, timelines, partner match, things like that. So it's the whole realm of things. But Anna, who is Rob's partner biologist in the valley, has just said that wetland restoration never ranks out high enough. And in order to get a wetland restoration practice, she has to couple it with something else. So it has to come in with some other NRCS project code or practice. And if it's strictly just a wetland restoration project, then it just doesn't get funded. So I think that's what we're seeing when wetland restoration is on the list for priority projects, is that we can't get it funded. It's not that there isn't a need, it's that it just doesn't rank very well.
Okay, so maybe that's a slightly different issue. Instead of necessarily prioritizing as a high priority practice, maybe it goes back to developing those funding pools and where those projects might get funded, and kind of that type of a situation.
Yes, but at least what I've seen so far is, as we know, the wheels of government don't turn very quickly. And so the more access and the easier it is through all of the way you guys prioritize things to get that funding on the ground is helpful. So that's just coming from an outside perspective and trying to partner with NRCS.
Absolutely. No, we greatly appreciate your feedback. Okay, so it looks like Stacy was able to pull the numbers real quick. And maybe this goes back to what you were directly saying, but we only had one instance of 657 planned in 2023, and there were none in 2022 or 21. So I guess we need to potentially have that discussion if it's a practice that we want to prioritize, or maybe I did not. It appears that David has a question in there. Are 580 and 395 similar enough that we could have just one and then add in 657?
David, I see you have your hand raised. If you want to expound upon that, go ahead, please. Unmute. And...
Okay. Just looking for ways to get this one in there since there's so much interest in it. And I can't help but think about this one with what the changes that just got made to the waters of the U.S. definition, that it's kind of keeping some level of protections for wetlands feels important now, if there's people that are going to put this into place. So I don't know if there's an opportunity there to add it.
Either Brady or maybe Jean, do you guys want to speak to what 580 or 395 are? And I apologize, Brady. I know you just got the invite this morning. Welcome to the STAC.
So I'll take a stab at it, but this is not my area of expertise. But we see a lot of stream bank and shoreline protection work in emergency recovery, of course, after flood events and the like. But I expect there's also some opportunity for non-exigent work along the same kinds. Sometimes that's in the form of organic practices, plantings, and the like, and sometimes it's hardware riprap and other practices like that. So, and Gene may be able to cover or add to my clumsy comments there.
They were well appreciated.
It
Gene,
looks
go
like
for
Gene is itching to do so. He's got his hand raised.
Well, since these are engineering practices, I did a quick pull up of the standards. And basically 395 is basically doing in-stream work. And the 580 is doing the stream bank and the floodplain area work. So, and actually when you're reading through the 395 standard, it says, this practice does not apply to stream bank or bank stabilization. Instead, use conservation practice standard, stream bank and shoreline protection 580. So it does reference the other standard as it being distinct practices and stuff. So the stream habitat 395 is basically in stream work and onto that edge of the bank. And then bank and above is going to be the 580. Hopefully that provides the differentiation that you're looking for.
Eric, I see your hand up. If you wouldn't jump in.
Sure. I just had I guess a point of clarification. When you talked about 657 being planned, that's I guess the number you're looking at is just that, or those projects that got funded, correct? Not how many were applied. So that, because that would tell us, you know, how many actually applied for 657 would tell us the need, I guess, in my mind, rather than just, you know, how many. I think if it's just one that got approved, that kind of tells us that there may be a need out there. So just wanted to mention that. The other thing I just wanted to throw out is, you know, some of these practices have a return on investment for producers and landowners, and wetland restoration is one of those that may not. And so we need to incentivize it more because they're not seeing potentially a return on investment from, you know, increased production or whatnot. So just another comment about 657. And having said that, I don't know which one to take off, unfortunately, because they're all important. So I'll leave it at that.
Excellent, thank you. And we're seeing some wonderful comments in the chat as well. So Susan Lahr, good morning, Susan. She would like to see us raise the priority of 657 and see if it makes a difference this year. And to Dominic's question, Stacy was able to pull our numbers for us. So for 395, stream and habitat improvement and management, that's the in-stream practice. In 2023, we funded 7 projects. In 2022, we have 3 instances of the practices so a total of about 10 over the last 2 years. For our stream bank and shoreline protection practice, that's the kind of banks and wetlands type projects. We saw 8 in 2023 and 4 in 2022. So both were more widely used than we have seen the 657.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep. And to that point, maybe the discussion needs to evolve more around creating a fund pool that enables those wetland improvement projects to potentially score well and compete for funding, as opposed to necessarily potentially adding it to the high priority practice list, or maybe we need to do that as well. Exactly. Yeah, Rob, that's a really great point. So we used to have a couple years back, it was called targeted conservation proposals that enabled our local partners, conservation districts to submit for priority projects that they saw in their area with a funding request to do kind of all the pre-planning so that we knew how much that investment was, what those projects would look like, and then those potentially got funded individually from the state's allocation. So maybe that's a part we can take that as a recommendation when we're reviewing and developing fund pools, is discussing offering a wetlands fund pool for those type of projects.
Sure. Yeah, that sounds great to me.
That's a priority of the working. Stacey, come over here and say that.
So another thought is our resource team leads, when they conduct their local work groups, if that is a priority in their area, they do have the opportunity when they're building their resource team ranking pools to include that as a category to offer in their own fund pool. So when we go through and break the money up throughout the state, there are state level fund pools that are required by a national office that we have to offer. Then there are ones that are priorities within the state that cover the whole state. And then each resource team lead has the option to pick from their local work group priorities the categories within their resource team ranking pool that they offer, and that they receive money that can only be used within their resource team. So that is an option there too.
Okay, so I'm seeing a couple comments in the chat. Good morning, Ray. He appreciates the recommendation on the fund pool for 657. That's a solid option. Matt says that 657 is listed as a climate smart ag practice. If there is a purpose for high priority practices to incentivize underutilized practices, it seems 657 would be a good fit for this purpose. Carrie says that all sounds good, and she would hate to lose the stream practices. Rob agrees with Carrie, but okay, so that brings us back to, if we want to add 657, what are we dropping off the list? Susan says that she doubts the interest in 395 or 580 would disappear if they aren't high priority practice, but remain a regular practice. I recommend dropping 395 and adding 657. I would greatly appreciate additional discussion on that if we removed 395 and added 657.
They still get sent back if they went to
Okay. Renee, do you want to, Renee or Amber? Amber, come on over. So Amber just had a great idea how we might also be able to accommodate this.
So Renee and I are on the payments schedule team for the state. And so we also do get to pick source water protection. So Renee is doing a quick search within our payment schedule to see if any of these overlap, where we can make some of those substitutions a little bit better. So if you'll just bear with us a quick few seconds, we'll have that answer for you.
Oh yeah. Let me real quick. I think Rob, you alluded to the climate smart list. I have it right here. I'm going to just drop it in the chat so everybody's aware of the climate smart practices as we're. Nope. Stacey, could you upload it, or somebody? Okay. Climate smart. So the lists that we're going to share, these climate smart activities in that mitigation list, that was a really good point out. They're it is key to kind of ensuring that we have practices available for climate smart and prioritizing those practices as well. So although I do anticipate that the climate smart list that we're going to share is going to change substantially, I'm anticipating that things are just going to be added to that list instead of taken away as well. Oops.
Thanks, Liz. Do you have a sense
Okay.
of when those changes might occur?
Before fiscal year 2024, we keep waiting. We saw some drafts coming out, but nothing's been finalized yet.
Sure.
Unless maybe Clint has a better answer, but.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Yeah, no, and thanks, Liz. You're correct. We'll update for fiscal year 24.
Okay. Perfect.
Liz, I think we have a couple of different options here. If we're looking or asking people whether they want to drop a practice in order to add 657, I mean, we could set that up as a multiple choice right quick and let people determine what they want to drop. Or we could roll forward with the original question, which was, do you recommend that we adopt the high priority practices list that you have there? And if enough people disagree, then we could go ahead and try to construct an alternative right quick. But we have a couple of different options, whichever way you want to go.
Perfect. I'd really like to hear just a tad more feedback on what to potentially drop to add 657, because I'm hearing you guys loud and clear that 657 is really a desired practice that we want to add to the list. We were able, so source water practices, we will be talking about that a little bit later here with the Source Water Protection Subcommittee. But on that list for fiscal year 2024, we have 340 cover crop is also on that list. 327 conservation cover is on that list. 315 herbaceous weed control. 590 nutrient management and 580 stream bank and shoreline protection are also on that source water protection. So in those target project areas that we're going to be looking at for source water protection, if those projects were potentially in that area, they could still receive those higher payment rates for that list of practices as well. So go for it, Eric.
Can you just clarify, do these high priority practices get additional points in the ranking, or is it just they get additional funding?
They just get additional funding. And, okay, so in the payment rate, instead of just being the typical like 75%, they would bump closer to 90% for that payment rate as we calculate it.
Right. So adding it to this list may not get it funded, even because it won't get additional ranking points. I kind of lean towards having it be a TCP or a fund pool of itself. I think that may be the better route, in my opinion. That's just my opinion.
That's Eric, we hear you loud and clear. I think I'm looking around the room I'm sitting in, and everybody's kind of nodding that if there is an interest and priority in making sure that these type of projects are getting funded, adding it to the list isn't necessarily going to guarantee that, but having a fund pool directly for those is what's potentially going to get that funded. So, okay. Yep.
Yeah, I think that's a great option.
I'm seeing a lot of people agreeing with that. So we'll potentially take that as a recommendation in the fund pool development, but I guess that still leads us back to, is there a need to add it to the high priority list, high priority practice list for those higher payments, and then removing something else? And I saw a couple hands fly up, but Sean, I am not fast enough to catch who went first.
Yeah, that's okay.
Me.
Ray, I think you were first, if you want to go ahead. Go ahead, Ray.
Thank you, Liz. Thanks for engaging in this conversation. I would say I just would offer that the Wildlife Subcommittee would be willing to help with looking at a designated fund pool or something like that coming out of this conversation. So we can do follow-up with you if that's the route we end up going. So I just wanted to say that and offer that up.
Perfect. You're incredible, sir. You know I'm gonna take you up on that offer. Excellent. Sean, you got to keep helping me with hands here, please.
Okay, I think next then is going to be Dominic Barrett.
Hi, Liz. Thanks for all the conversation on this. Just curious, with the TCP, would there be a specific geography related to that? Or could it be pretty general statewide, or how would that work out?
I think that would potentially be up for discussion, Dominic. That's a great question.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. And
Kyle.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you all for the discussion on this. Really appreciate it. One other question on the TCP. You know, looking at it kind of as a bundle of wetland practices, would it only be available for the 657, or could you put other wetland practices in there as well? So it's a more comprehensive TCP sort of list.
Yeah, I think since Ray has volunteered the wildlife subcommittee to potentially talk this through, maybe that's where we work on developing what that would actually look like. I would anticipate that it would be a suite of beneficial practices and not just a single practice.
Okay.
But we're
Awesome.
getting kind
Thanks.
of far afield. We need to get back to those high priority practices. Susan had suggested dropping 395 and instead adding 657. Are people in favor for that?
Liz, I've got that question ready to go to see if there's anybody in favor or not in favor of it, if you want to run that.
Okay, so let's go ahead and open that up. One more little bit of logic that we used last time, adding 395, is it's often a very high priced practice, and our payment rates have a hard time fully incentivizing the 395, which is why it was added to the list a couple of years ago, last year. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Sean, as you open up that poll, we're going to say that we are removing 395 and instead adding the 657. And so that's what we're voting on. And let's just get an initial gut check on how people feel about that. So that's the high priority practices as discussed. If you disagree with that, please feel free to say no. It's going to give us a good indication with the group level agreement in making that switch. And if not, if we see a whole bunch of no's, we'll keep the discussion going for just a hot minute. Thank you.
Go ahead, David.
We do if our answer is maybe.
You got to pick. There's no maybe.
Abstain, maybe. I don't know.
Don't abstain. Get your vote in there. If we need to keep talking, hit no.
Okay, it's looking like the no's not recommending dropping the 395. The no's seem to be predominant. It's about 75-25. We'll go ahead and close it in just a couple of seconds. So anybody else who needs to respond, please go ahead. And all right, I think we'll go ahead and close it.
Hey, Sean, this is Gene.
Yes, sir.
There's a chat that's saying that they couldn't find the question.
Okay, if you'll click in the chat, well, let me go ahead and just copy that link again. All right, let me put that in the chat. So if you click on that link that I just put in the chat, you should see that question pop up in your browser. You may need, if you haven't logged in before, you may need to log in right quick, but that'll take just a second. So we'll give you a few minutes.
Feel like somebody should come off mic and sing a song for us as we wait. Any volunteers? I won't do it. Everybody leave.
No. Okay, Carrie, were you able to see that? Okay, she got it. All right.
Okay.
Let's go ahead and lock that. I think the no's have it. So we are not dropping 395. I'll go ahead and put that in the chat. There we go. So we're not dropping 395. So I think we're back to the original question of the proposed high priority practices you have there.
Okay. Is there? I'm open for additional discussion. I know that we said that we'd discuss it more if we saw a whole bunch. Go for it, David.
Are there any of these that just don't get used, that data on them not being highly desired, or are there any that are fully covered by something else that's on the list that used to not feel like we're losing something? Because all of these look really important, but it's kind of an early process to try to one off.
Yeah, that's a great question. We need to keep in mind, yeah. So, Jean, I'm gonna jump to you in just a second here. I'm just gonna go for it, Jean.
All right. What I was going to say is that, 327 is typically a practice that's been used through CRP. And so my question was for you to provide to this group was, how often is it used outside of CRP? That said, with cover crops, being that it is probably the easiest practice to be applied through Act Now, does the Act Now then qualify for being in the high priority practices and that higher payment?
Yes, as it currently is, it further incentivizes participation in that Cover Crop Act Now.
Okay.
Stacy's looking up the numbers for us real quick on 327. So I'll have that in just a second. If the network was faster.
See, it's good to have a team there with you.
It's incredible. I can't tell you how wonderful it is.
See, now we should just do the Jeopardy theme.
Yes, if you'd like to hum it, we would be willing to listen.
I don't think anybody wants to hear that.
So it looks like, thank you, Stacy. In 2023, we had 36 instances of 327 planned, and in 2022, we had 18. So it is getting used in the programs.
I kind of wonder if a lot of it was, if it was used in the Oklahoma.
I think a lot of it's used in the Ogallala fund pools that we have to facilitate kind of converting and lesser prairie chicken and converting back over to dryland type agriculture. Okay. And it's also used, I guess, in CSP quite extensively in the northeast corner.
All right, thanks. I just wanted to make sure that they had the information on those two practices, because those are two that I would think that may be able to come out, especially, with the Act Now. But if the funding for Act Now receives that priority practice payment, I think, yeah, that's a good one to leave then.
Okay, so is there any additional discussion on what could be removed? Because otherwise I think we're potentially still looking. Yes, go for it, David.
Tree and shrub planting
you're on mute.
covered already. Hear me now?
David, we can
Yeah, I
hear
can hear
you,
you,
but you're
Dave.
cutting in and out.
Sorry. Is 612 covered in 645 and well, you can tell how far I'm reaching here with this, but just we haven't talked about that one yet.
That okay, so 612 I'm getting was added to this last year because of local working group feedback through our conservation districts and through our local conservation partners because of the desire to increase the implementation of that one. Stacy's going to look up the numbers for us real quick on the implementation rates of that one. But that, Jean, do you want to describe that one real quick so folks know what we're talking about potentially removing?
The tree and shrub planting. Let me.
As you're looking
so
that
fast
you can
here.
proper
All
as
right.
you're looking for it, just as a heads up to the group, we have 19 instances planned in 2023 and 17 instances in 2022. And it is on the Climate Smart Ag list.
And 612 is the establishment of woody plants by planting seedlings or cuttings by direct seeding or through natural revegetation or regeneration. It applies to any land capable of growing woody plants, and it has a number of purposes on there. So, and you had mentioned whether it could be done under 645. Well, 645 is to provide and manage upland habitats, connectivity within the landscape for wildlife. So if the wildlife plan that is developed under 645 included something like that, it could be potentially covered underneath that, but more often than not, you would want to apply it through the 612 practice rather than trying to do it through 645.
Or yeah, perfect. Perfect. Thank you, Jean.
Liz,
okay.
I think you have a good comment there at the bottom from Rob that you might want to take a look at. Might help us move along here.
Absolutely. So thank you, Rob, for providing that feedback. He says that he honestly thinks that a dedicated fund pool for wetland restoration would better meet the concerns here rather than adding 657 to the priority list. And so, Sean, if you wouldn't mind clearing the last question, let's throw it back up, keep the list as presented, or for one final vote, if you'd really like to see 657 added to that list, vote no, and we'll continue through some internal dialogues to see which one we can potentially drop from the list to accommodate adding 657. I will say that we will have much greater discussions on adding a fund pool potentially for wetland type projects, for those 657 type projects, so they can compete on their own with their own merit.
Okay, that question is active, and I've reposted the link if you need it. And we're having lots of people respond.
Excellent. Waited on bated breath.
Okay, we're gonna give it about 10 more seconds. If anybody needs more time, please let me know somehow, unmute or post in the chat that you need more time. Okay, we'll go ahead and lock it, and it looks like we'll move forward with the FY24 high priority practices as recommended, and there's the results. Okay.
Excellent. Excellent, excellent. Thank you, sir. Okie doke. So our next question that we have that we need to discuss with everybody is we've got our EQIP conservation incentive contracts, high priority project. Last year we ran, as Kendra and Stacy discussed, a project area that was statewide that specifically addressed grazing land resilience and drought. We were able to spend the funds there on rangeland, pasture, and forest land, directly targeting to ensuring resilience to drought. We want to get your concurrence and find out if there's additional project areas or thoughts on potentially offering those CIC contracts with a different type of flavor in mind, or with targeted areas within the state. I'd encourage any discussion. If not, we'll move to the polling question to potentially look at this. With the history of drought and the recent drought years we've seen, it's given us an opportunity to build in some resilience to those systems that had maybe faced a little bit of degradation due to the drought and the drought climate. It actually worked really well for Colorado, I think.
Yes.
Okay. Brad, it does have to apply to the entire state. So we can open up pockets of different project areas, but every acre in the state needs to be able to potentially apply for CIC. Okay, not hearing any discussion. Sean, I'm going to ask you if you wouldn't mind opening up that polling question for us.
It's up.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. Again, next time I'll come prepared with tacky music for in between.
Okay, give it another few seconds. If anybody needs to get to it but can't, let me know. And we will close that down and post the results. Looks like it's 100% yes.
All right.
You go.
Excellent. Okay, so our next topic for discussion and feedback is those resource concerns that we're addressing, since we were all pretty agreeable to the grazing resilience to drought. These were the top resource concerns in NRCS lingo that NRCS has identified that we've been using for the last couple of years: degraded plant condition, livestock production limitations, and terrestrial habitat concerns. Are there additional concerns? And again, please feel free. I know NRCS is steeped in its own type of lingo for treating natural resource concerns. Feel free, if there's something that needs to be treated in these fund pools that we aren't addressing, or you've got a question with what something covers, please, 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 if we need to expand this list, let us know. And I'll leave it there for a second. Amber has posted the list of resource concerns up higher in the chat if you need to refer back. It's a multicolored list of lots of words. Amber's going to post it again for us again. There we go. just for quick and easy reference. Go for it, Patrick.
Yeah, can you give a quick summary of what these line items are, these titles?
No, sir, I can't, but Jean can.
Okay.
Boy, you're just picking on me today, aren't you?
Yes, sir, that's my job.
Okay. So I'm trying to blow this thing up so I can actually see it. There we go. Oh, and it gets blurrier. So are you looking for the resource concern category or the resource concerns themselves?
So we're looking for the resource concerns themselves, the broader type discussion. And if you wouldn't mind just providing some information, like big picture ideas on what we're treating when we're treating these 3 resource concerns, I think that would help the group understand kind of that bigger picture of the project.
Okay. The degraded plant condition is really when you're looking at, is that plant condition, whether it's on the grazing lands or some other forested lands or whatever else, is that plant producing the best that it can? And then what we're looking at then are what are the causes of that degraded plant condition? That goes back into that conservation planning process. The livestock production limitation, we're looking at, okay, is there a limit out there to what production there is for that livestock? And that terrestrial habitat is really looking at, okay, the habitat is out there. Is it the habitat that should be there for, say, different wildlife species? When we look at our ecological site descriptions, that provides you what that terrestrial habitat should look like. It should be this percent of this percent of that, and kind of go, okay, these are the forbs that are there. So what kind of terrestrial habitat degradation is there out there? And so they're looking at these items to really determine whether there is the production that you want, are the plants sustainable and are they healthy, and what kind of livestock production limitations may there be? Maybe you only have spring grasses or a monoculture of early cool season grasses, so you only have production during a certain time of year. So that's kind of where these things are looking at. So hopefully that helped.
Perfect. And I see that Ray has the, go for it, Ray.
Thanks. The way I look at it is this identifies the resource concern, and then NRCS is able to then take the conservation practice to address it. So these aren't practices, these are the concerns. And so they can apply a bunch of different practices with underneath each of these 3 in order to try to address that resource concern.
Yes, sir. Thank you for interpreting from NRCS speak.
And
okay.
Liz, I just want to add, if people really want to dig more into these resource concerns, we can send them to the Field Office Technical Guide, Section 3, and they can see a whole 42-page document on resource concerns.
Absolutely. Hey, Jean, would you mind posting a link in the chat for folks, just in case they do want to do a little deeper dive?
I would, but I can't even post to the chat, so.
Uh-oh. Okay, it sounds like Amber sent it to Sean, and maybe Sean can post it here in just a minute.
All right.
Thank you.
I'm trying. Let me open this up right quick.
Okay.
Is that attachment B? Is that what that is? Yeah.
Yes, Amber says yes.
Okay. Well, just a second. So I'm going to post this in 2 parts because it looks like I'm afraid it's going to be too small to view otherwise. So let me try this.
And as you're
posting that, what we're looking
that,
for?
Yeah. That makes it bigger. I think Amber potentially sent you a whole document that then further dives down and then describes exactly what these are in kind of a wordy paragraph form so that folks have a little better understanding.
Survey or the AD 2065?
Amber will resend it to you, Sean.
Okay.
Okay. Shall I you real quick and figure out? Okay. As we're working on getting that posted, so folks have that as a reference, I just wanted to call out Brad's question. Is there an opportunity to graze cover crops in cropland to allow degraded plant condition to improve on range, pasture, etc., and allow it to be more resilient during drought periods through CIC? I will let Jean talk to the grazing cover crops opportunity. Those individual, how folks plan to increase forage and rest areas. We've even got payments in the payment schedule for deferment. So I don't necessarily know that we could transition over to cover crops. That might be a different question, but those CIC contracts are really set up to be as flexible as possible to potentially address those concerns and allow for rest if needed, or finding that forage from other sources. Great question, Brad. Jean, do you want to hit the grazing cover crop part of that question? Can we graze cover crops?
Yeah, cover crops can be grazed, especially if NRCS doesn't provide any financial assistance for that. If NRCS provides financial assistance for that, it falls it into a different category, and you may or may not be able to graze as much, but you can potentially graze some, but not as much as you would if it was just installed on your own. But yeah, if a producer puts in a cover crop, they can definitely graze it.
Okay, so it sounds like that's possible. Good morning, Cindy. Cindy says, does soil quality fit into all of these three resource concerns? And I'm going to let Jean speak to that.
Boy, you're asking a lot of me today, aren't you?
I am. You're earning it today.
All right. The soil quality fit into all of these. Soil quality. Soil quality will definitely fit into the degraded plant condition and the terrestrial habitat, and it would probably fit into some of the livestock production limitations. So I would, in a general statement, Cindy, I would say yes, but again, it would go back to the individual location and what's causing the issue that we have. So in a simple term, yes.
Okay. Stacy did want me to remind folks that as we currently have the project areas laid out for this grazing land CIC, cropland wouldn't be an eligible land use within the CIC. Grazed range, pasture, and forest would be. So
and I want to point out that Amber went ahead and posted a link. It's an external link, so people should be able, even on the outside, should be able to access that information for their deeper dive into resource concerns.
Perfect. Thank you, Amber. Thank you, Sean. Okay. And I see that Brad says okay to that. So if there's not a whole bunch more discussion, Patrick, go for it.
Will there be one CIC pool strictly for grazing, or will there be more than one CIC opportunity?
So as of right now, the recommendation that we just kind of discussed was having that one grazing land resilience to drought type project for CIC. That doesn't mean that we won't have other opportunities in just regular equip, right? So those 327s in cover crops and regular equip and planting grazing, kind of with that technical planning. Go for it, Jean.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if people follow that link and they expect to see what you have there, that degraded plant condition, it is not on the official resource concerns list, because that is a grouping of resource concerns. So, but when you get into degraded plant condition, if you go to that bigger document look at the plant resource concerns, and you'll find those resource concerns that are those subcategories underneath that you can actually look into.
I appreciate that. Yes, thank you, Jean. So we're taking into account a large slug of resource concerns, smaller resource concerns under those bigger categories that we've got listed here. And I think, Patrick, did your hand pop back up?
No, that was Justin. Justin, go ahead if you like.
I just had a quick procedural question about EQIP CIC. If a producer has an EQIP CIC contract for one of these areas and say that's a 5-year contract, they're 2 years into it, and they want to add more practices or something like that, can they start a second EQIP CIC program, or do they have to let that one expire before they can add additional practices?
For EQIP CIC, as long as you're addressing different resource concerns and you are installing different practices than what's enrolled in the original contract, that's perfectly fine. You're not stacking or getting duplicative payments. Somebody can reapply to go even more above and beyond.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okie doke. So I think with that, we're ready to potentially vote on this. If you guys would like more time to review the resource concerns or for increased to have a little bit more discussion, please feel free to vote no on this question. That'll be an indicator that we need to discuss this more. And I see Amber has posted another resource concern fact sheet. Thank you, Amber.
And that question is active. I reposted the link if you need it. If anybody needs any more time, please unmute, let me know, raise your hand, send me a nasty gram. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and lock it up. It is 100% yes. I will go ahead and post the results in the chat. Go to the next one.
Excellent. Okay, so our next question that we wanted to ask you, historically and in the past, for as long as I can remember, NRCS Colorado, because of some of the costs of doing business in Colorado, have incentivized, have offered a higher payment rate along the 75% of a typical scenario implementation rate. I'm looking at Renee across the table for me because she helps me with my language regarding this. That means that we are paying historically underserved producers, those beginning farmer and rancher producers, veteran producers, socially disadvantaged producers, closer to 90%. In the past, you guys have recommended to go ahead and keep with those higher rates to keep people implementing practices, but every year we check back with you guys. Is there a reason for us to lower our payment rates to a lesser amount, not to go below 50%, or keep them at the higher rates? I don't know. I'd encourage discussion. Prices just keep going up, so I'd be shocked if we want to lower them. But Justin, please feel free to speak up.
I guess that was my question with your comment about prices going higher. How are payment rates adjusted for rate of inflation? Because they've all practically been reduced just through the fact of inflation the last few years.
Absolutely. So they're working on it, and Renee is walking. I'm buying her time to get around the table.
Hi. The National Payment Schedule core team has a special national cost analysis team that does economic analysis for inflation. They price labor markets, they price materials. They review that every year, and that's how those prices get adjusted.
Is that what you need, Justin, or did you have additional questions?
No, that answers my question. So it's not a across the board X% based on rate of inflation growth. It's
No.
By surveying what actual projects are
It's
costing.
it's by surveying all the components that go into practice scenarios, labor, materials, equipment, and potentially foregone income on certain practices.
Okay, thank you. I guess I would just throw out, you know, it's not only these practices that are going up in price, but everything else is. And if we want folks to continue participating, you know, as prices rise and producers, we all have to decide what we're going to do and what we're going to forego. And so if we're trying to incentivize folks to do practices that may otherwise be chosen to forego, I think the higher percentage cost share is worthwhile.
Perfect. Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Patrick, you got your hand up.
Yeah, the higher percentage makes sense to me. I'm curious, is there a move afoot in these new farm bill discussions to look at adjusting existing contracts if sudden inflation spikes happen?
To my knowledge, I have not heard that discussion. Oh, yes. Thank you. Renee's coming back.
So yeah, last year we discussed they had authorized some special payments through what they call a CARP payment, specifically due to COVID. Certain practices were evaluated by the economic team, and they were selected. And when we processed payments for installation of those practices during the appropriate time period, they did earn a higher payment on existing contracts. Later on in the year, they authorized then a secondary inflation payment labeled under PISP for a greater number of eligible practices that had a lot of components that had skyrocketing costs. And so we had just finished up those. So there were some adjustments to current and past contracts that had those practices, and that where they got them installed, they did earn a greater payment.
Okay, thank you for that. So those were sort of like relief payments or extra money that fell in. If there was a conversation to be had somewhere within NRCS about how contracts are formed to allow for adjustments based on inflation or costs, where would that conversation take place? At what level or what office?
Yeah, that would probably be within the Farm Bill negotiations, because all of those CARP and PISP payments were not actually a contractual responsibility. They weren't added to the contract. It was just an extra if we had funding available, if the practice was implemented in the time frame, and if it otherwise qualified that those additional payments were made pending available funds. So that would be something I don't know if you can talk to if you'd like to talk to your senators or Congress folks into providing that feedback. That would always be appreciated, because we have heard that concern.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so with that, we're going to open up a polling question regarding leaving our payment rates up closer to the 75% for typical producers, and that closer to 90% for historically underserved producers. If you disagree with that, if you would like us to lower the payment rates, knowing that they can't go any higher than that, please put no on that question, and that'll indicate to us that you would like to see them lowered.
All right, that question is active.
Thank you, Sean.
Anybody else need any more time? Okay, we will block that, and that is 100% yes. And it's posted, and we're ready for the next one.
Excellent. Okay, so with that, we're going to jump to our easements program. And just to remind people, so there are some questions at the end of it. That was the basic questions that we needed for EQIP and CSP. Our easements, agricultural conservation easements program, has two different chunks. The agricultural lands easement, kind of synonymous with like the old farm and ranch land protection programs, those working operations, grassland reserves program. And then we've got our wetland reserve easement program, which is really dedicated to restoring wetlands and associated, maintaining that wildlife value, the wetland functions, kind of the non-typical ag value. Okay, so we ask the STAC a couple of different things like we have for the other programs. And I apologize if it seems like I'm stumbling through this presentation. Our easements program manager has unfortunately, her and her newborn have COVID, and the babysitter has COVID. And so I'm going to try to get this information to you guys and get you what you need here so that we can keep this moving forward. But so when we do wetland restoration contracts, when we're looking at those type of enrollments, we have to develop a geographical area rate cap, something that we will not pay in exceedance of a certain amount of value for that property. And so what we need to ask for you guys today is a recommendation on what that potential rate cap is. We have seen, I'm going to just jump forward real quick. Historically, in the past, we have not paid in exceedance of $5,000 per acre and 80% estimated fair market value on those individual property appraisals. We received word late last week that New Mexico is proposing jumping theirs up to $12,500 per acre and requiring water rights encumbered with one of those transactions. For 2023, we've got all of our neighboring states here. Wyoming looking at that $5,000 per acre. Nebraska, depending on irrigated cropland or all other land uses, is potentially as high as $9,000 per acre or as low as $5,000 per acre. Kansas is looking to about $2,000 per acre. Oklahoma is $2,000 per acre. Last year, New Mexico ran it at $5,000 per acre. Utah ran it at about $5,000 per acre last year. And so we were right in the middle with about $5,000, not to exceed 80% of estimated fair market value. So when looking at these changes at New Mexico, we like to try to stay in step with our neighboring states, if at all possible, to kind of increase consistency across implementation of the program. We have seen very limited applications in the Wetland Reserve Program, very little interest from participants as those deed restrictions are incredibly restrictive. Oh man, those are real tiny numbers. I just wanted to post these, and I'm sorry I'm struggling seeing them right now. Let me pull it up on my phone real quick and talk you through them. So when we were looking at farm real estate value, and granted, this is not synonymous with what we would necessarily be enrolling in the Wetland Reserve Program, but the fair market value from the USDA agricultural statistics is about, for the state of Colorado, is about $1,770 per acre for I'm going to go back a slide, for just regular farm real estate value. Our cropland value here in Colorado, we are typically seeing $2,480 per acre. And for our pasture land value, we're seeing about $940 per acre. And granted, these statistics are provided from 2008 into 2022, so they are not ideal, especially with recent valuations and changes on the market. But I guess our ask and the discussion we did want to briefly have this morning was leaving option A, leaving that geographic area rate cap at that 80%, $5,000 per acre, or is there a need to increase that at this point in time? And if so, what documentation can we look at to refer to needs for increases?
Liz, I
And
went ahead
so-
and pulled the PDF that you got those figures from, and I posted the PDF link in the chat if people want to open that up and take a look at those.
Thank you for cleaning up after my messes, Sean.
I wasn't cleaning up. I just, they can access it and see it for themselves.
It looked clear as day to me last night. I don't know what that says about last night. Go for it, Ray.
Go ahead, Ray.
Thanks, Liz. Thanks for holding in there with us on all of this. This is a lot. You're going to need to have a long lunch. I would say, as far as the true market rates, Colorado is wonderfully diverse. And so that's one of the blessings we have. It's also the curse when we do averages. I know that the rates are much higher in many of the locations around the state than what we're seeing reflected on those charts and graphs. So I'm for us making an adjustment up on the per acre evaluation component of it, keeping the cap at 80% fair market value, but looking at the per acre component of it. And certainly it's going to look different from one corner of the state to the other, but I don't think that we're as competitive as we could be in moving easements in the state based off of that valuation that we have there. As far as supporting
Thank you, sir.
documents,
Thank you.
I think that's challenging. I mean, all my reference with it is I'm looking at current sales. I'm looking at what current rates and what the current value of per acre is going for. And in many cases, unfortunately, we are seeing that even rangelands in certain situations are going towards 8 to 10, sometimes even $12,000, depending on if there's encumbered water rights with it as well. So I'm for making a move.
Thank you, Ray. Okay. Is there any more discussion? I hear you, Ray. And Sean, I will fully admit that I forgot how we asked that question. So if you wouldn't mind throwing that up there real quick, just so we can discuss the options that we put in there.
Sure. Yeah, it's activated now. It's just either remain at 5,000 per acre or increase to be commensurate with surrounding states. And if if the second option is recommended, then I don't know whether you want to discuss currently what that rate might be, but we can adjust on the fly if we need to.
Excellent. If folks wouldn't mind responding to that question in the chat. And then if you do have documentation or references, and maybe Ray, I'll give you a call a little bit later and see if we can hammer down some additional documentation that we can point to if we wanted to make that move to increase. If you guys wouldn't mind posting that in the chat, or I'll go ahead and I'll put my email address in the chat and emailing it to me. We can certainly take that into account.
Okay.
Sean, I will.
Anybody?
Wait.
Yeah. Anybody need any more time? Right. we'll go ahead and close it out. And it looks like the consensus is to recommend increasing the rate. Let me go ahead and post those results in the chat. There you go.
Excellent. Excellent, excellent. Thank you, guys. So for that, I do believe, let me double check real quick. Yep. So that concludes the big financial assistance programs updates for 2024. I appreciate your time and your guys' willingness to share your perspectives. It's hard when NRCS gets siloed, and so we rely on you guys as our partners quite a deal in setting up our fiscal year 2024, any financial assistance programs and their outreach between you guys and the local working groups. We try to have our ear to the ground to make sure we're truly addressing the needs that are there in Colorado. And I can't understate our appreciation for your willingness to participate in these calls and provide your feedback. So with that, Sean, I guess I'll turn it back over to you. Or
okay. Yeah. Hey, let's we're really good on our time, so let's go ahead and take a quick break. We'll start it off at 5 minutes, and then after that, Ray, if you are ready with yours, we'll resume with you when we return. All right, so I will share this right quick, and we'll see you in just a few minutes. Okay, welcome back. Thank you for sticking around, especially if you've returned. Up next, we have Ray Aberly with the Colorado Parks and Wildlife, part of the Wildlife Subcommittee. I think he's the chair. Ray, all yours.
Thanks, Sean. And thanks, Sean, also for giving us that little break. I think that was well needed on my end at the very least. Well, I just want to say first a big thank you both to NRCS, FSA, and then all the folks who've been involved with the Wildlife Subcommittee. We've continued to be active this year. As all of you know, we're without a state biologist at this point. So when Crystal Phillips left last fall, that was a loss for us, but we've been kind of plugging along through there. I've got a couple of topics I just wanted to bring forward as updates and kind of future action items to the group. And then one conversation piece of a recommendation that the Wildlife Subcommittee wanted to put forward today as well. So kind of starting it all out, it's as always for all of us in the conservation world, very busy. For us as a Wildlife Subcommittee, and then more specifically for myself at Colorado Parks and Wildlife, a lot of initiatives going on within our state. One of the big things that happened this last year was in March, the final rule was put out on lesser prairie chickens. The northern population that includes Colorado and Kansas is now listed as threatened. And so action items related to that are kind of ongoing and forthcoming. As Clint referenced earlier this morning, the North American Grouse Partnerships worked really hard to start putting together a landowner alliance. And Dallas May, a rancher in Prowers County, sits on that landowner alliance and is giving some guidance and recommendations to how we do lesser prairie chicken work within the areas affected by the listing. And so where we're at right now is some preliminary conversations with NRCS, the Landowners Alliance, and some other of the partners involved with it, some of the NGOs. We will be looking in the next several months to get together in a collaborative way and really engaging with Colorado Cattlemen's Association, the Landowner Alliance Group, and others to try to develop a path forward. One of the things that I think gets murky in this sometimes is that there's a lot of leaning onto FSA, NRCS, and the roles they can play in advancing lesser prairie chicken conservation. But really the NGOs in the wildlife community, Colorado Parks and Wildlife included in that, need to be leaders in that space. And so we look forward to that collaboration with many of the people on this call, with the landowners affected by this listing decision, and the different agencies that can bring to bear some positive outcomes for this. So more to come on that. I just wanted to brief everyone that it's something that's very high on the priority list for us in Parks and Wildlife to have those conversations. And so we'll be looking to form some sort of collaboration within all of this. So expect outreach from myself and others related to that so that we can kind of all get on the same page, figure out what action items can be taken, and make sure we're doing that in a way that is beneficial not only to the bird, but also to the communities and those most affected by it. Within that as well, and it kind of ties into this in a way, there is a lot of effort and conversations out there about grasslands as a whole. And so Bird Conservancy of the Rockies has been really a leader in putting together things like the Grasslands Roadmap. We continue to have that operating framework under the Great Plains biome, Great Plains grassland biome that NRCS and their Working Lands program has put forward. And I think there will be overlap in that conversation, but also additional additive things to that, looking at grasslands conservation within the state of Colorado. And again, FSA and NRCS become huge partners in that because of the programs they administer and just their collaboration and their desire to do good work in those landscapes. So I think that it's a point of conversation for us as a wildlife subcommittee on how do we continue to look at these working lands programs and utilize them to the full effect that we can. Certainly, as Clint referenced earlier, there's a lot of balls in the air right now related to funding, related to the Farm Bill status, related to where IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act dollars, will hit within the Farm Bill in this next cycle. And there's going to be a need for us to be quick and responsive with all this so that we can be good partners to NRCS and FSA, regardless of what that outcome is. But certainly if we're looking at the additive dollars, basically a doubling of budget for NRCS and FSA, how do we come to bear in supporting the efforts to get good conservation on the ground? As Clint referenced, this is, once in a generation potential funding opportunity. And so how do we partner well with landowners and producers, and as well as with FSA and NRCS to deliver those programs? So that's another big thing on our mind as well. The main thing I want to talk a little bit about today with you all, and the time I have, was the migration and corridor work that's going on within the state, and give you a little glimpse into where we are with CPW. So we had secretarial order with Secretary Zinke 3362 that came through numerous years ago now. That was followed up by an executive order from our governor, Governor Polis, in 19-011. And that really kicked off for us as Colorado work that we'd been doing, but really refocused us on looking at migration and movement, especially for large ungulates, but beyond the elk and deer and pronghorn we talk about as well all the time. And so what that the initial passing of those executive orders, or issuing of those executive orders, did was got us into kind of a broad framework. And what we've been doing since then is getting into really identifying through a lot of data. GPS collars we're collaring around 1,000 animals a year in different locations throughout the state, and now analyzing that data. And we're finally at a spot where we've got broad landscapes being pulled down into being able to look at discrete landscapes, and where kind of the bang for our buck and the efforts could best be applied. And so the action item out of that is that Cardinal Parks and Wildlife and NRCS will be setting up a meeting for later this fall, potentially early in the winter, depending on when our data is complete, to start having conversations about doing something within the state of Colorado akin to what we've seen happen in Wyoming and now Idaho and Montana. And that really looks at, again, concentrating on a landscape where we can put efforts, what conservation practices are best, what programs are best to apply there, and bring additional resources through the partnership with NRCS and FSA to deliver conservation in those critical areas. Not to bring anyone's day down, but just in this year, and during the course of the summer, and in my work in the field, really two well-known migration corridors within the state have had a lot of activity within them. One with renewable energy, another with oil and gas line, potential housing subdivision type thing coming in within it. And so it's just an example of what we know is happening, and the paramount need we have to continue to have connected landscapes. And so NRCS brings a suite of programs that can help with that through EQIP, CSP, also what we just talked about with ALE, ASEP as well, being important programs for that. And then certainly FSA with the Conservation Reserve Program. I don't want to steal any of Hunter's thunder, but we've seen significant enrollment. Colorado is now the leading state in CRP enrollments, and much of that was boosted by the enrollments in grassland CRP over the last several years. So that's an exciting opportunity, I think, for us. Clint's been very patient with us. There's been a couple of ongoing conversations about this over the course of the last year, and we want to get our data right. Much of the corridor work we've seen in other parts of the country uses, a couple of collars on animals, starting to identify corridors off of limited data, and not to poo-poo what they've been doing, but we felt it was really incumbent and important for us in Colorado to have robust data. And so multiple collars, multiple animals within herds that we're able to then, with a higher confidence interval, be able to say this is an area that we need to look and make effort. Along with that, Cardinal Parks and Wildlife started about a year ago at this time, working on a habitat and connectivity plan. And these kind of all roll together. And so that plan is in the process of being put together right now. Cardinal Natural Heritage Program, David Anderson's on this call as well. They're going to help us with the mapping and really the data within all of that. We'll be feeding them data, but they're going to help us synthesize that. And so many partners were outreached to. In June, there was a meeting in Denver with those partners looking at this habitat plan and what that will look like. I think we have been tasked in kind of facing what many of us face, and that's having the state as a priority. And when the state's a priority, it's really hard to do meaningful work at the finite scale that oftentimes needs to be done. There's the old saying, when everything is a priority, nothing is. And this habitat plan is really us working to try to identify the priority landscapes where we can do good work to ensure our wildlife resource is able to persist on the landscape and has some durability behind it. And so that plan, the first iteration of it is aimed to being delivered in June of 2024. And that really is a response to both the secretarial order and also the governor's executive order related to big game migration and movement. So those partners that were engaged in June do be expecting follow-up survey questions about some of the prioritization within that. This will be, like I said, again, version 1.0. We do expect to add additional species, additional landscapes in the future, but we need to get this ball rolling. And again, really towards that effort of us being able to take the good data that we've been collecting now over the last 5 to 6 years, getting that in a usable format and putting it out there in a way that we can then make decisions on that are going to be meaningful decisions and stop a bit of our scattergun approach, which I think we're all, we get into that. Everything's important. I told this story yesterday, but when Laura Tromboli reached out about maybe doing some identifying some priority landscapes within the state of Colorado for the application of the easements program through NRCS, my first response is it's all important. And I think we feel that more and more with the additional pressures we have from recreation, new developments, whether they're energy or housing, and the threat to the loss of agricultural lands, which we know is vitally important for our wildlife populations within the state. So I look forward to that meeting, a couple of meetings here. It's always a meeting to make more work, that's the way I see it oftentimes, but the opportunity to engage many of you when it comes to the conversation around lesser prairie chickens within the next 3 to 5 months here, and then also within that opportunity to meet with NRCS and sit down and start having conversations about how we might be able to do more migration and corridor work within the state of Colorado using some similar projects and programs to what we've seen in some of the other Western states. Additionally, yesterday we had a really good, we met as a wildlife subcommittee, a good, robust conversation about wetlands. I think that was reflected in what we saw today. So a real positive outcome here for us to re-engage with Liz and the programs team on looking at how to move forward with some wetlands conservation opportunities within the state with NRCS as partners in that. And then finally, for an action item for today, there's been a longer than should be, in my mind, conversation about grazing as a management tool on CRP. And so the wildlife subcommittee did meet in April of last year and wants to put forward a recommendation for adopting grazing as an approved management practice within CRP. And so I believe Sean does have a survey piece with that. I don't know if Gene wants to speak into that as well. But really it's looking at, and I'm going to pull it up so I read it correctly here within what we're proposing. So basically from an issue standpoint, currently grazing was not an approved management tool for CRP in Colorado. And our proposed resolution was to put forward to the state conservationists, FSA, state leadership, and to the STAC for adoption of the following to allow grazing for required management. Grazing for required management approved on eligible CRP with the following conditions: outside of the primary nesting season, which is March 15th to July 15th, starting on or after October 1st and completed by March 14th, and pursuant to the terms and conditions of the 2 CRP handbook. So really it would allow for grazing as a management tool on CRP when deemed necessary between October 1st and March 14th. So that's what we're putting forward today for your all's consideration from the wildlife group. Really that management on CRP in the 2 CRP handbook does reference back to the being beneficial to wildlife as one of the considerations for it. And we believe that October 1st to March 14th timeline really would be a benefit to wildlife in situations, and definitely by a case-by-case situation. But we also see that grazing is one of the most efficient and effective ways that we can cycle nutrients, we can stimulate new growth. And the reason for the October 1st date timeline is because we want to protect those warm season grass component within it. And so we want to make sure that they're moving towards dormancy or are in dormancy at the point that we get grazing on them, because oftentimes those warm season grasses have a high wildlife value, and we want to make sure we protect that within the stands. So with that, I'll stop and turn it over to Sean or Gene if they want to speak into that at all.
Yeah, the question is active and ready to be responded to. Gene, you have anything?
Yeah, and I was going to say, I like that the wildlife subcommittee actually took this action. They came up with a solution that's going to be beneficial for the grazing community and for the wildlife. And I think, it's a valid option for us to consider, and, we'll see what everybody does. Once we get it going forward here, then it goes to Clint. Clint then makes a recommendation to Kent Pepler for FSA, and it runs through their state committee, and then we should be on the right track to getting it approved. I do see Justin Miller has a question.
Yeah, a couple of questions, actually. I brought this up a year ago at our fall tech committee meeting, asking for the state tech committee to take this up, because in the 2018 Farm Bill, grazing for contract management was specifically approved as a new practice nationwide, and Colorado has withheld that practice. When that approval was made, the Farm Bill did so because all cost share on other contract management was taken away. And as a compromise, they said, we will allow grazing with no deduction in contract payment for that. So that happened in 2018 Farm Bill. We're now at 2023, almost 5 years later, and Colorado's getting around to catching up. My question is, first off, is with a new Farm Bill going to be, with the current Farm Bill going to be extended or a new Farm Bill promulgated, and Colorado approving this now 5 years later, almost 5 years later, do we leave our producers in limbo if the Farm Bill changes? And because we've drug our feet for 5 years. As well, contract management is preferred to be done years 4 through 6 on a 10-year contract. So if producers have been waiting because we have been talking about allowing this, and now they're out to about year 6, but it's going to take them a couple of years to graze an entire contract, will FSA work with them if this is approved to, I guess, give them more time in their contract period to use this tool? And I know that's outside of the wheelhouse of NRCS, but I believe there's some FSA folks on the call. So I guess that's question one. And then question two is, when it was approved in the 2018 Farm Bill, there were no boundaries put on grazing timeframes. Colorado already has the longest primary nesting season of any of the western states to limit any use of that for contract management grazing. And now we've closed that window even smaller from October to March. I understand your reasoning behind the long season, the warm season grasses, but it feels like we just keep taking a valuable tool and squeezing it back smaller and smaller when we do allow it.
I'll let Hunter answer the first question.
Yeah, so hey, Hunter here with Colorado FSA. So I may refer to Miss Cindy, our farm chief on the actual Farm Bill discussion, because I don't know a whole lot about the Farm Bill. As far as working with the producers to fit this contract management in, FSA policy states that for a 10-year contract, it can't be done in year 7 through 10, and then in a 15, it can't be done. The last 3 years on that one as well. So as long as it can be completed before that, then there's some leadway with working with producers to get this completed. And then also to chime in on the restriction on the October 1 through March 14th date. As Mr. Ray mentioned, while it's beneficial to the warm season grasses as well, FSA policy actually outlines that the grazing as a management activity has to be completed in one complete fiscal year. And our fiscal year starts on October 1. So while it's also beneficial to the grasses, it aligns more with FSA policy restrictions to allow that grazing during the October 1 through March 14th.
So let me make sure I understand that. So if a producer is going to do contract management, any other contract management, they can split that over years, say 3, 4, and 5, or 4, 5, and 6, and do thirds of it over those 3 years. But grazing, that is not allowed. They must do it all in 1 year. They can't split that contract into thirds or halves.
Sorry, can you repeat your question? I'm sorry.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding this before we vote on a recommendation.
Mhm.
What you're saying is FSA policy allows for contract management. Say a producer was going to DISC as contract management. They could do a third in year 3, a third in year 4, and a third in year 5, or 4, 5, and 6. But with grazing, that is not allowed. It will be a one-time must do the whole contract.
No. No, they can split the grazing between the years just the same that they can do disking.
Okay, but
Yeah.
it has to be completed by year 10. And I guess that was my
That's
first
correct.
question is, or it has to be completed by the end of year 6. But
For
if
a
we have
10-year contract, yeah.
yes, for a 10-year contract. But if we have producers who've been waiting for this and we have drug our feet in Colorado for now almost 5 years after the 2018 Farm Bill was approved that allowed for grazing to be used as contract management, will there be any allowance for those producers?
Well, I guess if we're looking at, we would have to be looking at contracts that are not already past year 6, because then their management activity would have already been planned and completed by now. But FSA policy is pretty strict on those management activities not being completed after year 6. So for any producer that could not get it done by year 6 or by the end of year 6, those plans have already been created with a management activity. It may be more beneficial for them to stay in line with what's already planned compared to try to switch it to grazing if they cannot get it completed.
Okay, that answers my question. And my last question is, when we're on the cusp of a new farm bill being written, how does this carry forward? Like I said, it came about in the 2018 Farm Bill, and here we are in 2023. Do producers have any faith that this, if they write this into a contract per NRCS recommendation and FSA takes it up and approves it, that it will not change when the new Farm Bill comes out? Will it carry through the end of their contract so that they can use this in their as a tool for contract management?
Right. So, I can't speak on what's going to be in the new Farm Bill. You probably have just as much of an idea as I do on that, and I'll refer to Miss Cindy on it. But if it's written with an approval at the time, then it would stay within their conservation plan, whether the Farm Bill changed or not. But
okay,
but Miss Cindy, you may want to add on to that, possibly.
Hello, everyone. Hunter's correct. Once a management activity has been approved and put in their conservation plan, it is approved in their conservation plan, and it can carry out throughout the contract. So, for example, some of the older contracts had prescribed grazing or had grazing as a management activity in some of the older contracts, and they were still be able to fulfill those grazing management activities because it was approved at the time that the contract was approved. So it does follow the contract. As for the Farm Bill, typically in 2018, it was kind of a unique year where they changed some of the criteria when it came to the management activities. But typically when we get a new revision of the handbook, and sometimes that happens when we get a new Farm Bill, is we get a new revision of our handbook. And when a revision of the handbook has been updated, we have to reassess and reapprove all state policy and amendments, which means taking them through the state technical committee, and then through our state committee and submitting them to national office. So with the new Farm Bill, we may or may not have to re-review these. It depends on if they come out with a new revision of the handbook for us to update the policy aspect of it. I hope that kind of answers that question. And just to go a little bit further with what Hunter was saying before about the management activity stuff, and I do apologize that it has taken us this long, but you are right, it was in the 2018 Farm Bill. However, in the 2018 Farm Bill, it also stated that all management activities had to be approved through the State Technical Committee. And for the last few years, there's been a lot of concern about overgrazing. And that is why there had been concerns about it and why it had never gotten approved. I am glad and grateful that the State Technical Committee and the subcommittee has come up with a solution to that, to where we can now start adding it. If producers have existing contracts right now that have, and this will go to your question about the up to 6 years, the handbook is very clear, like Hunter said, that if you do not do your management activity by the end of the year 6, which would be by September 30th of that 6th year of the contract, you are out of compliance. If the producer waited to do their management activity hoping that the grazing was going to get approved, that's a management decision on their part, because their conservation plan was approved with light tillage or interseeding or whatever it was. And if they chose not to do that, that was their choice, because they were informed. I understand that they wanted to wait to see if the grazing ever got approved, but you also have to look at the compliance aspect of it. And it took longer than we wanted it to, but it's done with now. So to get extra time to be able to do that grazing into year 7 is not an option. That's not going to be an option. They need to have their management activity done by the end of the year 6. Now, if they are in year 5 right now and they want to change their conservation plan to change it from light tillage to grazing, once we get it approved through national office, that revision can be done on their conservation plan, and then they can graze after October. It won't be October that it would get approved by national office, but they would be able to approve be able to graze once it got approved by national office. And we could change that conservation plan to get rid of that light tillage or interseeding or whatever it may be, to change it to the grazing. And Hunter is right, you can graze 100% of the acres in 1 year, or you can separate out the acres, a third, and a third. You just can't graze the same acres every year. You have to alternate.
Thank you. That answers all of my questions, or a lot of my questions. I guess a couple follow-ups. When would you see this, so we can communicate back to producers? If the STAC approves today, it goes before FSA's committee and is approved. When do you foresee it being approved at the national office level?
I honestly can't answer that question, because of course national office is busy with Farm Bill and stuff like that. We are meeting with our state committee in October, so it will go forth to our state committee in October, and we will send it up to national office and hope that they can get it approved timely, because this is the only thing. It's not like they have to look at all of our management activities. This is the only one. So I would be optimistic and hope that they would approve it right away, but I can't give you a time frame. I can't. I don't want to put national office on the spot like that.
Okay.
And get people's hopes up and then have it not happen.
Understand. I appreciate that. Last question, and this goes to more of a procedural STAC question. I was actually the person that brought this up to be discussed again in last fall's STAC committee, and we had one short conference call in about October, looking through my notes, mid-October of last year, to talk about this. I think Cindy, you headed this up and got it organized. There were several folks from NRCS and some producers. And then I never heard any more about it. And the wildlife subcommittee had taken this up and brought the recommendation forward. How the STAC talks about wanting producer involvement in these discussions and these things. How does a producer know that these discussions are taking place, other than raising their hand and saying, I'll be involved, which I did? And then it's been radio silent since last October to now there's a recommendation to move forward. So I apologize for all my questions, but part of these come from the fact that I didn't see an opportunity to be involved and ask some of these along the way.
I'll let NRCS answer a little bit of that about asking questions through STAC, but I will tell you that I apologize for us dropping the ball. We had a staff change, and the CRP specialist before, if you remember, was Ivy. She had transferred and moved to the national office, and Hunter started this year. And Hunter and I have been trying to work on it as time goes by with Ray and stuff like that. And we never got back and had another meeting. Far as I know, we just had been talking to Colorado Parks and NRCS. But to answer the questions on what you can do with NRCS and STAC, I'll let Jean or Clint or somebody else answer that question.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Cindy. Justin, thanks for your engagement and your questions during the meeting today. And apologize, we just didn't do a very good job of following up. Got busy rolling out IRA and our general farm bill allocations, and we'll make sure in the future that we get yourself or any other producers that wish to be more engaged in those discussions. The best place to be involved and provide that input is through those subcommittee opportunities, whether it's on the wildlife subcommittee related to specific topics, or if it happens to be on source water protection and water quality subcommittee or forestry subcommittee. Anytime if you hear or others on the meeting today, if you know of individual landowners or ag producers or forest owners that would like to be more engaged and ask questions or provide input, the best way for us to get them involved will be to get them engaged on one of the applicable subcommittees, depending on their area of interest. So, Justin, we'll do a better job of keeping you in the loop and getting you engaged in future meetings.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry for taking so long, just a lot of questions associated with this. Appreciate everybody's effort in moving this forward and getting to a place where we have a recommendation. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem at all. Thank you, Justin.
Okay, Sean, does that get it to me then?
I believe it does. Did we want to follow up with the end of the question? I have to admit my computer crashed here right in the middle of it. Ray, are we done with that CRP question? Do we need to post the results? It is 100%.
Yes, I think that's where we're at with it, Sean. And
okay,
Justin, I'm going to go ahead. Appreciate your comments, Justin. I did send you a follow-up email too with this. Thank you.
Okay, next up, Jean, our state resource conservationist for NRCS Colorado. Jean, go ahead.
All right, I'm going to share my screen here. Hopefully it comes through all right. Let me know when you see that.
Yep, we see it.
All right. Good afternoon. Well, I guess it's still morning. I'm Gene Bacus. I'm the state resource conservationist for NRCS in Colorado, and I had a update that I had to give today, if it'll let me. And there we go. All right, so CRP grazing proposal, that is done. This is what that proposal was all about. So thank you for the wildlife subcommittee, and thank you, Justin, for all your questions. Since my time is supposed to end at 10:55 for this and the SWP, I'm going to fly through this. Interim practice available. NRCS does have some new interim conservation practices that people may not be aware of that you can actually apply for through the EQIP program. Two of them are described right here. One is the low tunnel systems, and it's basically using the low tunnels or the plastics over individual rows to protect crops from sun, wind, excessive rain. And if we ever have that, I would like to see that, and or cold to extend the growing season. And I think some of the stuff actually is done, in the vegetable production areas. So it may be something that applies there. And it applies to land capable of producing crops, based on those resource concerns. We also have the organic management practice that came on this year. And it really is tied to the organic transition initiative that NRCS has. And it's basically trying to lead those people through that, and fostering the resources for converting to that organic management. So we also have raised beds. This is to create an above ground growing environment. And it is where there is actually an unsuitable site for production, and it's the desired reuse is for crop. So there are some stipulations in here and stuff, but it pretty much is targeted more towards the urban ag and under the high tunnel system. So there are some opportunities for it, but I just want to point this out, and it's really targeted towards those urban ags. And another practice that's been around for about 1.5 years is actually 808 soil carbon amendment. It has now been converted to a permanent conservation practice standards, which is 336, and it is the application of carbon-based amendments derived from plant materials or treated animal byproducts. It's applicable to crop, pasture, range, forest, associated ag lands, developed land, and farmsteads. So the application can occur pretty much anywhere on that practice. And so I just wanted to kind of go over those 4 practices because we've had some of these starting to hit, and I want to make sure that producers start getting notification that these are available. We need to make sure that planning is done prior to them being contracted. And right now, the only people that can really plan these are the state office ecological science staff. We are working on getting the 336 JAA or Job Approval Authority out to the field staff so that they can deal with this. So just a heads up on those. The climate smart ag and forestry. We've talked a lot about that today, and there have been a number of practices that have been put forth for trying to initiate their availability through the climate smart ag. And I could show you the worksheet, but the big one that people seem to be talking about the most is 449. It currently is available, but it's only available on rice. And so there's work to try and expand that to other areas and to general croplands so that we can use that. The couple of other ones that are also included in that were 443, irrigation systems, surface and subsurface, brush management, 314, prescribed burning, 338, 533, pumping plants, drainage water management. There is a slew of practices here that we could actually go through, but the process for doing this is basically we have to find the scientific studies to show their positive impacts on the climate. That information is then submitted to myself and or engineering. We will review it, get Clint's concurrence on it, and then we submit it up to the national level for their review, and then we wait for the national decision. Right now, there are probably 30 practices that are on this list that are up there for review right now. And so we will wait until we get response back from them to determine whether any of those move forward. But we're really hoping that some of those practices do move forward. Buckwheat as a cover crop. Colorado is in one of the few areas of the country where we do a lot of exports of wheat to Japan and Southeast Asia. The problem that we have there is that that part of the world does have a potential health risk with allergies to buckwheat. And so buckwheat contamination is a very realistic thing that we need to consider when using it in cover crops. And so Colorado has taken the incentive to remove buckwheat from our plans, our seed mix planting tools for cover crops. And so any cover crop that does include buckwheat, we really have to consider whether it is going to be compliant with that standard, because we have removed it just for this reason. There are some areas that it may be, but I don't even want to get into that right now. I really hope that people look at some other options for buckwheat. And I have shown here on the screen the national bulletin that brought that forth, and it is just a reissuing of another national bulletin that we'd had, and the Colorado State bulletin that we had submitted a couple of years ago. So it is out there that we need to look at keeping that out of the plants or the cover crop mixes. Patrick, you have a question.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the bulletins. Are you suggesting that mixes that contain buckwheat but that don't fund the purchase of the buckwheat seed should be disallowed?
Yeah, if buckwheat is included in a cost shared, and I shouldn't say cost shared, a financially incentivized cover crop or planting, we really need to consider whether it's going to be meet the requirements of that practice standard. If it's non-caught, if there's no financial assistance for it, we can't do anything to the producer for that. We just hope that they are educated enough based on this information that they are potentially risking statewide problems with exports to Japan and Southeast Asia.
I'm sorry, it wasn't clear. Are you saying that if somebody's got a cost share on a cover crop mix and they're not looking to cost share the purchase of the buckwheat, but they are looking to cost share the purchase of the other seeds, if buckwheat's included, that should be disallowed?
If buckwheat is included, we're really going to have to look at whether that meets the practice standard. And since we have removed it from all options in our tools, we hope it doesn't get included. If it does get included, we're going to have to review it.
That doesn't relate to the resource concern of soil health, though.
Well, buckwheat is the contamination. It's buckwheat. It's a potential contamination of the wheat. You know, if seeds fly around, it can contaminate the wheat. And if there is a wheat field within a couple of miles of that buckwheat, it could potentially contaminate that wheat field and make then that wheat field non-transferable or non-sellable to China or Japan. And so there have been shipments of wheat tankers that have been sent back or just dumped into the seas because of this contamination. And so we're trying to just remove it from applicable cover crop seedings that NRCS is providing financial assistance on.
Yeah, I understand the rationale. It doesn't relate to the concern of soil health or why we would use buckwheat. It relates to the market access regionally.
Right. So that's why, you know, we're trying to keep our markets open so we don't have to deal with contamination and we can still provide, you know, services to the countries that are buying our wheat. And yeah, it does not necessarily relate to the cover crop because it is a great cover crop, but because of this other issue, we're trying to limit or eliminate its use. All right.
Yeah, you're at cross purposes with the policy. It's a difficult thing.
Yeah. So, all right. Any other questions on the buckwheat? All right. Next, any other questions before I go on to source water protection? All right, hearing none. Source water protection. First off, I'd like to applaud the people on the source water protection subcommittee, the water quality subcommittee, Robert Murphy and in his group, Christina Burry. They're the two co-chairs for this committee. And everybody can see the people that were involved in this. Kristen Hughes, John Dugan, Stephen Reeves, Weston Toll. We had a great group of people in there. Even Estella Moore, even though she has left Colorado non-point source pollution and gone to EPA, we will forgive her for that. We also have other people from Colorado Rural Water Association, Mallory Hiss, Gabrielle Mata, Christina Burry, as I mentioned, Allison Witheridge. All these people, Kimberly Mihalik, they did a great job in going through this. They set up what their process was, compiling the data, filtering the data, you know, trying to determine what hucks were privately owned, which ones are publicly owned, what were the potential crop production, irrigated crops, forestry, things like that, range production. They overlaid a lot of different layers to come up with a recommendation for what they would like to see, the hucks that they'd like to see added to the source water protection. Then they went through and they looked at some hucks that they would like to see eliminated, some on the west slope, some on the eastern plains. Along the front range they were looking at, especially where there was low private land ownership, in the Ogallala aquifer area, because of some of the special things that are going on there. We're kind of limited on that. But this is the process that the group went through to try and get us a list of hucks that they would recommend. And this is just the last couple of steps that they had there. But I just wanted to show you that they spent a lot of time on this. They spent probably 4 to 6 months of their time working through this process. And here is the final map. The orange areas are basically the areas that were added to what Colorado currently had. Up in the northeast along the South Platte River, and in the southeast along the Arkansas River. From there, we looked at trying to add, other areas, but with the limitation of the 20% cropland, 20% of the cropland, we couldn't add but maybe 100,000 acres more. So next year, I've talked a little bit to Robert already that we're going to try and start this process a little earlier so that we can do a fuller analysis, look at some of the other areas that are within Colorado, and that we can try to do a deeper dive on what the impacts have been on the conservation that's been applied in those existing source water protection areas. And then we can look at, okay, this area is pretty well protected. We can look at removing that land then out of the source water protection. So Robert said that would be a great idea. And especially when they started looking at some of the Ogallala aquifer stuff here that's related to Republican River and things like that, they understood that once we got that information to them. And they really want to try and expand some of these areas a little bit so that they can start having a greater impact on some of that source water. So if there are any questions on the source water protection, that was all I had for that. I'm sorry I kind of rushed through that, but I know there is a limited time here on the agenda here yet today. So I just wanted to kind of rush through that and say, okay, that was what I had for today. Are there any other questions? I'm hearing none, Sean, so I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay. That
Hey,
leads us to the, oh, go ahead, Liz.
Hey, sorry guys. So the one last thing that we needed to talk about regarding source water protection is our source water protection practices. Give me a second. We do need to have a vote and a poll regarding those recommendations.
Okay, if you'll go ahead and put it on screen, I'll copy it and put it in the question right quick.
Okay, Renee just put it in the, oh, yes, hold on. My apologies. Okay. I'll be sharing my screen here in just a second. It is in the chat, but I'm going to go ahead and share it as well. Oh.
Okay.
Oh, the little plus button will make it even bigger. Too big. Okay, folks, so what we're looking for is the list of source water protection practices need to address water quality concerns. Okay, there is not a limit to the number of practices that can be added to the list, so we can add additional practices without removing practices. these source water protection practices in those watersheds that Jean had up on the screen. Having a project that addresses water quality in one of those polygons will in essence open it up for potential source water protection type funding, and the higher in practice payment rate of 75% or 90%, closer to 90% for all, I do believe, since we're already at 75% for the rest of things. So the question to the group that we're looking for feedback on is, do we go ahead and leave the list the same, or are there different changes that are necessary? Practices to add. And I apologize sharing my screen like this. I can't see any hands raised or anything. So Sean, you'll have to help me navigate.
Okay, no hands raised. Don't see anything in the chat. Yeah, I don't see anything in the chat. Let me know if you're ready to. That is posted now. The question's posted. And we'll see what kind of response we get. And there's a link if you need the link again. And we'll give it about 5 more seconds. And I see 0 no's. I'll post the results in the chat. You have 100% yes.
Excellent. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate your feedback.
Okay. If that's it for that portion, let's go ahead and move on to Abby Gray, the Executive Director of the Colorado Association of Conservation Districts. Abby, are you still with us? There you are.
I am. Thank you. Thank you all so much for having me. I will try to make my update as quick as possible. I know we're behind on the schedule. Just a couple of things that the Colorado Association of Conservation Districts is working on that is pertinent to this group. We did work in collaboration with Phil Brink from Colorado Cattlemen's Ag Water Program to host a watershed open forum 2 weeks ago Monday. We invited all of the conservation districts and partners to come and join us and just kind of go through some questions regarding what we can better do to support the watersheds in Colorado and help them continue to do their good work. So you'll see some more from me about that. We're gonna bring all those results from that meeting together and kind of send out another survey to folks. So keep an eye out for that. Clint had mentioned earlier that we work with a couple of education programs. So I'll just say that we hosted our 2023 Camp Rocky event, which is an outdoor education camp up in Divide, Colorado in July. It was a wonderfully attended event. We filled all but 2 seats that we had available for that camp. So we're very excited about that. We did host our state Envirothon event in March. We had 6 teams from throughout the state join us for that. And we sent the winning team from Woodland Park up to Canada in July to compete in the international competition. So that was really neat. We do have our 2024 topic already. So you will be seeing some outreach from us in regarding